battle in the heart of Alabama caught our attention. Coal miners in one community, they've been on strike now for months.
Working as long as 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy.
I said no contract, you said no code. No contract, no contract.
If we ain't all free, ain't none of us free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
Hello, Tennessee Valley. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator, Adam Keller. We are broadcasting live to tape, online and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio Studio in Huntsville, Alabama, for your viewing and listening pleasure on this Christmas Eve, 2022. Today is the best of the Valley Labor Report. We ask, what is a union? We replay an old interview about unions and racism from 2020. We replay the segment where we first discussed the child labor issue at Hyundai, all that and more on today's program. If you want to be part of the show today, you're not going to be able to because, like I said, we are not live today. This is a pre-taped episode, but you can call our phone number or text our phone number and leave us a message, and we might answer it on the next program where we will be live. That phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. If you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap here on the radio, or if you just want to see what we're up to throughout the week, then you can find us anywhere you find anything online. We're on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, TikTok. Anywhere you find anything, we're there. So look for us there, all at the Valley Labor Report. Just a reminder, your support helps us stay on the air. Our largest single source of funding comes directly from our listeners. So if you want to become a sustaining member of the program, make a one-time donation, or buy our merch, you can go to our website. That's tvlr.fm, tvlr.fm/store, or tvlr.fm/donate. You can also become a patron at patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. If you're a member of a union, then you should get your local to sponsor the show. Definitely consider that. You can reach out to us for more details. So, the issue with a best of program is that ideally, some of your best content, hopefully, is going to be coming from pretty recently. And that's the case with the first clip that we're starting off with today. It's from a panel that we convened, I believe it was back in September, so not too long ago, but it has been a few months, where we convened several different trade unionists from across the country and across industries. And one of the first questions we tackled in this panel was, what is a union? That's a pretty important question, if somewhat rudimentary, and Michelle Eisen from Starbucks Workers United and Graham Gale from the REI Union answered masterfully. Let's listen.
So we've got a working definition of workers, which is important because I'm in a union environment where I'm white collar, right? I work on the computer all day. I sit in my cube and I work on the computer. And I have a lot of coworkers that they do not conceive of themselves as workers. They conceive of themselves as professionals. And all of these, maybe there are interesting conversations that we can have about the divisions in the working class and what that does to people. But the important thing is to understand that we are working class. And so with that working definition, what is a union then? And for that, I'm interested, Michelle. I'll let you take that away.
So a union is a collective of workers that are able to use that as their voice when it comes up to, people like, let's say, Starbucks corporate, and use that voice to gain a collective bargaining agreement, but also to hold that company accountable. So I think the biggest thing, and this goes, right to the longshoremen, when you get those things, when you get those benefits, this also relates to Johnny's sort of gray area, right? A lot of these companies will try to say that a union is a third party. It's actually it's a barrier between the worker and the corporate representatives, or the worker and the company. But the actuality is it's the only thing that allows the workers to hold that company accountable. Starbucks is really big on claiming the amazing benefits that they already offer their workers, which I can tell you as one of their workers is not actually as good as they say it is. But let's just say that it was. There's still nothing preventing Starbucks from pulling those benefits away. The only thing preventing Starbucks from coming in and taking those benefits from us once they've been offered is a collective bargaining agreement, is a contract. So it's really hard for me, this whole third party narrative, and they used it quite a bit in their anti-union campaign here in Buffalo when they were trying to stop this from happening to begin with, is, we want to be able to have a conversation with each and every one of our partners. We don't want to have to go through a union representative. Well, first of all, that's completely unrealistic that you're ever going to have a conversation with every 400,000 of us. The better thing for us is to be able to have a union collectively made up of your workers that can have these conversations and then come to you, with maybe one rep or two reps, but representative of the 400,000 people standing behind us, and be able to say, this is what we need. This is what we need on the floors of these stores. Nobody knows what we need better to run these stores than the people actually running them. And when we sign that agreement with these benefits that you offer us, we want to make sure you can't come and take them away. I personally, in the 12 years I've been with the company, I know some of the benefits we had when I started in 2010, and I could make a nice little list of the ones that have already been just taken away from us unilaterally without any conversation. And so a union allows us to have that voice and to hold the company accountable.
And there are several things that are important and that I want to pull out there. And one of those is that, you said that it's a collective of workers coming together for, a better workplace, better working conditions and stuff like this. And that is a definition that's not dependent on the government. That's a definition that's not dependent on the boss recognizing that you're a union. If you come together, you say you're a union, then by golly, you're a union, right? And it doesn't matter what anybody else says. And that's an important thing to understand. And we should, I think we should, and I think most of us, we're all in unions that more or less agree with this. We should make use of the state power through the National Labor Relations Board and the National Labor Relations Act where we can and where it makes sense. But if all of that falls away tomorrow, and that's not the case, and we're in a landscape without legal protection for unions. Workers had those before those legal protections. Workers had unions when it was expressly illegal, right? And so it's important to understand that, whether or not you have a union election, if you're coming together with people on your job and advocating for yourselves, then that's the working definition of a union. That's the thing that's important there. Graham, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
Yes, I did. You kind of touched on it, but in our organizing at REI, a lot of people, hadn't either been in a union or didn't know what a union was. We have a lot of people who are either in college or recently graduated, or have been in those more like quote unquote professional white collar jobs, who are sort of in a second career, or this is their like fun retail job, who didn't really know what a union was. And so when explaining it to people, the one point that we as organizers try to make is that, no matter what union you're affiliated with, whether you affiliate at all, ultimately the union is us. We are the ones who are making the decisions. We are the ones who are deciding, when to use our power, how to use our power as workers. So yeah, that is just kind of the fine point that I wanted to put on that, is that, if you call yourself a union, you are a union because it is made up of you and however many coworkers you have. And the trick is just becoming organized and knowing how to wield the power of your collective voice.
Absolutely, absolutely. Johnny, was there anything that you wanted to pull out of that before we move on?
Yes, thank you. Everyone said it so perfectly, that you are the union. Once you start talking to your coworkers and you all decide that, hey, we need to come together to make changes in the workplace, that is the day that your union has started. And it doesn't need to be a large number. It could be 2 of you. As soon as you say, hey, let's do something about this, your union has been formed. And that's it. And so with everyone has talked about third partying the union. That is, I'm sure we'll get to this later, a big union busting tactic. Knowing that you are a union as soon as you start talking about making change, that deads that right there. So yeah, just to echo what everyone said, you are the union as soon as you start talking about it.
Next up is a clip that is sadly still relevant months later, as the Federal Reserve and conservative anti-worker forces in the Democratic and Republican parties seek to curb inflation by disciplining workers. In the following clip, we ask and answer the question, are workers to blame for inflation, with some help from our friends at Means Morning News.
I just wanted to play this clip from Means Morning News. They were talking about inflation last week, about some reporting from The Guardian. And, and we wanted to play this because the conversation about inflation is so, we talked about with Matt Huber how when there was a push to, there was at one time in this country a push to make illegal single-use plastics, to tackle the problem of littering and this environmental issue at the point of production where it actually comes from. And then the industry people were able to come and create this whole narrative about it's not us, it's you. You should just throw it away in the proper place. Don't litter. They did this whole campaign about it. And similarly with inflation, we've got all these industry moguls that are trying to convince us that our wages that are barely, oftentimes not even keeping up with the pace of inflation, are the cause of inflation somehow.
Right. I mean, right now the inflation is about double the wage increases, at least from the data that I've seen. So
while at the same time, executive pay is still going through the roof. I mean,
right, and stock buybacks,
profits are increasing. So let's go ahead and just play this clip from Means Morning News about inflation.
Recent investigation by The Guardian has revealed that the so-called inflation crisis in the U.S. is actually just a huge transfer of wealth from the working class to capitalists. Persistent myth around price increases is that companies are just reacting to rising costs of labor and raw materials by increasing their own prices in order not to lose money. The reality is companies are taking advantage of relatively small increases in costs to jack up prices and enjoy world historic profit margins. And this cuts across several different industries. The Guardian looked at 100 top U.S. companies and examined their profit margins from the most recent quarter with measures from 2 years ago, before the pandemic took hold. And in case after case, companies enjoyed profits well above what they had experienced and well above whatever cost increases they've had to absorb associated with the virus. Median profit increase of the 100 companies examined was 49%. Meanwhile, workers' wages from the first quarter before the pandemic to the most recent quarter this year only went up by 1.6%. After an initial surge in wages at the start of the pandemic, worker pay decreased steadily as companies rolled back stuff like hazard pay, which further accelerated their profit growth. Look at some of these numbers. Mattel Corporation, a profit growth of 111,400%. BP, an increase of 12,005%. Caterpillar, 958% profit increase. Swimming in cash thanks to their price increases, these companies have spent billions enriching investors through stock buybacks. Some companies were even losing money before the pandemic, but under so-called inflation, they are more profitable than ever. UPS reported a quarterly profit loss of $106 million in the quarter before the pandemic, but in the most recent quarter, a profit of $3.1 billion, allowing the company to spend almost $7 billion on stock buybacks.
Yeah. I mean, companies that were not profitable before the pandemic are now so profitable, they're spending billions of dollars on stock buybacks.
1,000% increases. It's
there's one company, Mattel, has a 144,400% increase in their profits from before the pandemic started.
Yeah, I'm glad that we shared this because the inflation conversation really has been just dominated by BS, frankly, because when they're not blaming workers and unions for the increase in prices, folks are saying it's Joe Biden. And I mean, listeners of this program know that we're not, Joe Biden fanboys by any means. But if you really think that the reason prices are going up in the grocery store and at the gas pump can be laid solely at the feet of Joe Biden or at the hands of workers and the unions that represent these workers, you're mistaken. You're wrong. You're just wrong. Because we see clearly the ways in which capitalist firms in many industries have monopoly power, especially, meat industry where we've seen a lot of rising prices. So there's a combination of factors, monopoly power, and the fact that they can raise these prices and get away with it. Because what are we going to do, right? In many cases, we're talking about products that we don't have much of a choice. Folks have to buy groceries, folks have to buy fuel, and so they can raise these prices. And it's not going into the pockets of the workers producing these products. Not at all. And, there are other legitimate issues going on contributing to the inflation crisis in terms of COVID and the disruptions in the supply chain. The war in Ukraine is having a major effect. Ukraine and Russia are both major exporters of grain and other products. And, of course, it's not just the war, but actually the American-led sanctions on Russia, which is also contributing to this economic crisis. And, the other part of that in terms of the supply chain is for years, companies have moved towards this just-in-time logistics. And so they have not been keeping the inventories they used to. They've been having these just-in-time production supply chains, and it doesn't take much to cause a lot of disruption. One thing I think that we could see as an opportunity there is in the workers in these industries who have such a piece of leverage in terms of a supply chain. And I hope that those workers can leverage that to improve things for themselves and for the rest of us as well.
Alrighty, folks, we're going to head to our first break. Don't go anywhere, though. We've got plenty of great clips for you coming up on the other side, so stay tuned.
Hometown Action is a grassroots organization building a multiracial working class movement for racial, gender, economic, and environmental justice in Alabama's rural communities. We stand in solidarity with Alabama workers and are proud to support the Valley Labor Report's efforts to inform and build the Southern worker movement. Please visit hometownaction.org and follow our social media channels at Hometown Action to learn more about how you too can get involved to make the South a better place for all workers. Solidarity, y'all.
IBW 558 is like a great football team. You've got to have the aptitude, skills, and knowledge to outperform the competition. If you're a non-union electrician, now is the perfect time to get off the sideline and join our team. We have the absolute best wages and benefit package in North Alabama and Southern Tennessee. It's because our team stands together, bargains together, and our families benefit from it. With immediate openings, you have the opportunity to see why the IBEW is the right choice.
Energy Alabama is a locally operated and membership-based nonprofit organization focused on advancing Alabama's clean energy future through education and advocacy. Many people in charge of infrastructure and building decisions simply don't know about how viable clean and renewable energy is. To that end, Energy Alabama has provided instruction to more than thousands of adults and tens of thousands of K-12 students across the state. We're working hard to build careers in clean energy and help everyday Alabamians save money on their utility bills. Learn more about our work and how you can join us at energyalabama.org.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for this program comes from the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 136 out of Central Alabama. Learn more at ibew136.org.
Attention union members, membership organizations, podcasters, or anyone with a payment processing need. The future is here, and your organization needs to be prepared by working with Unionly. With Unionly, your union or organization can take payments on a mobile device, eliminating processing fees, giving you a better price than other payment processing methods, while at the same time supporting a union-friendly business with a specialized skill set to meet your needs. Your members will thank you when they pay their dues at their convenience without waiting in line to deposit cash or check. Start preparing for the future today by calling 206-595-8631 or visiting unionly.io.
Are you looking for a better future, a career that can have you set for life, and to be a part of something that's bigger than yourself? If you are, then consider a skilled trades apprenticeship with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. The work of IUPAT is all around us, from the industrial painters who work on the bridges to drywall finishers, floor coverers, the glazers who install the glass in our skylines, and so much more. With an IUPAT apprenticeship, you earn while you learn and receive benefits while learning the trade, including a pension. We provide world-class education free of charge. That's right, no student debt. Our starting salaries for apprentices that graduate is above the national median salary with benefits for entire families. And you have the flexibility to take your trade wherever you'd like in the country to work. IUPAT District Council 77 covers our entire region, so give Adam Booth a call at 205-603-3142 for more information. Again, that phone number is 205-603-3142. Come build a better future with us today and join IUPAT.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Labor creates all wealth. All wealth should go to labor, and you are listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. We are bringing you the best of the Valley Labor Report today. If you've got anything to add, you can give us a call or send us a text. Our phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. Even though we are not live today, you can still leave us a message and we might answer it on the next program, where we will be live again on New Year's Eve. We will be bringing you a special New Year's Eve episode live. You can also participate in our YouTube chat, which I am hopeful is bumping, as the kids say right about now. So definitely, even though we're not live, you can chat with people in the chat. So our next clip here, we've got a deep cut for you. That deep cut, it's an interview from the summer of 2020 during the George Floyd protests, where we talked to the University of Washington researcher Jake Grumbach about the relationship between unions and racism. Enjoy.
This is an interview that I'm incredibly excited about. I think it intersects really nicely with the purpose of this show and the national conversation about racism that was spurred by the murder of George Floyd in late May. Of course, due to the circumstances of his death, a lot of the conversation around has centered around the obvious racism in policing and the criminal justice system. But of course, racism exists elsewhere too, and it raises the obvious question about how to work to combat that in a lot of different scenarios. Rarely talked about in the popular discourse, unfortunately, is the role that labor unions can play, have played, and ought to play in combating racism both systemically and interpersonally. Dr. Jake Grumbach, a researcher at the University of Washington, along with his colleague Paul Freimer from Princeton, hope to not only discuss these things but prove what the effects of unions has been on racial resentment of members quantitatively. I think this is incredibly important work, and Jake, I appreciate you taking your time to talk to us about this today.
Absolutely. Great to be on with you guys.
Thank you. So the fact that union membership decreasing interpersonal racism among members, the fact that it decreases racial resentment, this is a phenomenon that really any organizer worth their salt could tell you that because they've experienced it firsthand. And it makes intuitive sense, when you're because membership in a union necessitates having very hard and intimate conversations about things like pay, health care, whether to go on strike or not, and having these conversations often. So it makes sense that this increased personal exposure would decrease racial resentment, but you've gone a step further and attempted to put this phenomenon in hard numbers. Before we get too far into the broader conversation about racism and labor unions, I'd like to dig in a little bit on your study. So could you tell us how you're defining racial resentment, how you're finding the degree to which folks have this racial resentment, and how you're measuring the effect that union membership plays on this?
That sounds great. I think that was a great summary of the sort of issues at hand in the paper. So racial resentment is a way in surveys that social scientists use to try to detect racism in the public. And it's really actually hard to find racism in the public in surveys because of what's called social desirability bias. And you can understand this, that when somebody calls you on the phone and asks you various questions, if they're asking you questions about, do you believe black people are innately inferior to white people? Not many people are going to answer that. Even the ones that believe that are not going to answer it truthfully because it's embarrassing. So racial resentment as a measure is another way that essentially asks questions whether people believe racial inequality is based on institutional racism, long-term racism, the legacy of slavery and segregation and beyond, or it's due to sort of personal defects, laziness among black people and people of color. So that's there's a big debate actually in psychology, political science, and sociology, other disciplines about how to measure racism, but that's one main popular way. And then what we find, we do a lot of work statistically to try to show what, like you said, what labor organizers have known for a long time, and really also what historians and other qualitative scholars have known for a long time, which is that unions have played a big role in producing a sort of interracial, solidarity-based labor movement. And we try to show this statistically, and it's really important when you do this statistically to try to show that it's actually labor unions making people less racist rather than other characteristics of them that are just happen to be related to labor unions, that it's actually the labor union membership doing it. So we put in a lot of work to do that.
Right. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that work, because I think that there are some variables that people can think of that would make union members different than non-union members. For example, geography. There are more union members in New York and California, let's say, than in Alabama. We can also think about private sector versus public sector. Public sector workers tend to be more unionized than private sector workers, and the public sector also has a larger degree. To my knowledge, there are more people of color working in the public sector. So, how do you get those confounding variables out in your study?
Yeah. You should come be a professor in my department. That you're asking exactly the right questions. So the point here is that I think the point's about geography. So there are more union members in places where we'd maybe expect less racial resentment. Industries like teaching are more unionized, and people that become teachers tend to be, interested in these sort of anti-racism issues more than the average person. But what we do is we use what's called panel data, where you look across time at the same people. So you have them before, you can ask them questions before they were labor union members, and then after, once they become labor union members, and see the change. And that protects statistically against what you're suggesting, like confounders. So not only do we do things like statistically control for geography and for income and things like that, but we look at this panel data to try to see across time whether becoming a union member changes you. And that's a lot more effective than trying to compare otherwise similar people who are and are not labor union members.
Right. And
then we did a lot of work to establish that it wasn't other stories. So labor unions provide people better job security, and labor union members get paid higher wages than non-labor union members. It could just be, that people feel a little more economically comfortable when they have a solid middle-class union job than a more precarious job otherwise. But we show that it's not the income that's doing this. It's actually being a labor union member and being part of a labor union.
Right, and you mentioned that you use this panel data that looks at people over time, and not only does that remove the confounding variables of geography, public sector versus private sector, but that also works to decrease the amount of what you called social desirability bias, that a person is not going to tell you, right, that I hate black people, right? No one's going to say that in a study, but you can measure the social desirability bias is going to be the same before and after a person joins the union, right? Say the social desirability bias is like +1. I am like +1, not a racist, right? To whatever the base, whatever you actually are, you add +1 to your not racist score, right? Well, if you have original not racist score of 2, and then when you join the union, you have a not racist score of 3 or 4, then the delta is going to be the same whether or not you are having this social desirability bias. And I think that the data that you have in your study and the work that you've done to reduce these biases and confounding variables is really robust and laudatory.
Thanks. So that's these days in the social sciences and the quantitative social sciences, there's a lot of talk about, the politics of higher education in the U.S., whether professors are too liberal or whatnot. But there are such strict rules and sort of thresholds you have to reach to demonstrate a statistical finding that's real. They really, when you put a paper into a scientific journal and get it through peer review, they are looking for any potential reason you're actually wrong. So you have to build these really, really robust demonstrations that you found something. It's a little overboard, actually, but it does show once you get this through that what you found statistically is real.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think that, a lot of people, like you said, they talk about how, social science professors are very liberal, they're very loose with their studies, and they just say what they want to say. And I think that hearing from you about the things that you're doing to reduce the amount of personal bias that's going in from you and reducing the amount of confounding variables that are just found naturally in the world, I think that may help people kind of understand the amount of work that actually goes into stuff like this, because there's real serious work and it takes a lot of time to do this kind of stuff.
Exactly. No, way too much time. No, it's actually
How long did the study take you to do?
So we wrote it over maybe 6 months, the first real package of it, and then you send it to a journal. This was actually remarkably fast for my experience, and then it came back through peer review. In another 3 months, you get reviews that say you need to change these, and we're not convinced on these things. So one reviewer actually asked about right-to-work states and non-right-to-work states. Basically, in the social science peer review process, they make you demonstrate that it could not possibly be any other reason for why you're finding the statistics you're finding. One could have been right-to-work states. One could have been we have too many professionals, teachers and nurses unions in our sample, things like that. We did extra work in the appendices to demonstrate that was not the case, and really we're finding that labor unions make workers less racially resentful, less racist, more interested in interracial solidarity for sort of working class politics.
Right, right. So when we talked earlier, kind of doing the debrief before the interview, you mentioned that this study is very temporally bound, right? This is not your results are not going to be true throughout all of history. And in fact, for people that know much at all about labor history, they know that labor unions, especially the American Federation of Labor, at the turn of the 20th century, was a very racist organization. They had segregated unions, white-only unions, black-only unions. They fought very hard for restrictionist immigration policies. They were very demeaning to immigrants and immigrant labor, and so, but then there came a change in the labor movement with the CIO and other more interracial solidarity movements like the CIO, like the IWW stuff in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. So, can you talk about kind of the role that the labor movement has played in racial politics throughout the 20th and 21st century and how it's changed?
Yeah, that's exactly right. From the AFL, which was a sort of artisanal craft union where they really fought hard for the Chinese Exclusion Act and were an all-white union. But that changed, and by the 20s and 30s, some majority-white unions like the CIO and the IWW were actually really pushing for civil rights to go hand-in-hand with labor politics. And they started articulating something a sort of theory that goes back to at least W.E.B. Du Bois in the early 20th century, but the idea that racism is a tool of the ruling class to divide workers and the working class and prevent solidarity and working class power to get their due. So by the 20s and 30s, the IWW and CIO were really pushing in that direction, and then this became a huge phenomenon in the UAW in the 1950s and 60s under Walter Reuther. And you can see Walter Reuther marching in the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, Martin Luther King's March on Washington. You can see him walking in the front with fellow sort of union leaders like A. Philip Randolph of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, a black union. And that was when they knew at the time it was very clear that the labor movement was going to be a part of the civil rights movement. And they knew that, again, racism is dividing working class people all the way to now where the AFL-CIO is very clearly has anti-racist messaging. The leaders make speeches against racism in politics and elsewhere and say, keep your eyes on the prize. We need working class solidarity when we're divided by race or gender or sexual orientation or really any of these sort of identity or cultural dimensions. That is a tool of the powerful of the ruling class to divide us.
Right. What do you think it was? What do you think it was that made union leaders and the rank and file in the 20s and 30s when this started becoming more apparent? What do you think it was that what was the light bulb moment, right? Because for so long, unions had, like we said, unions had played into this racial division, native versus immigrant worker division. And so what was the light bulb moment that made them see that, oh, this is like not in our interests to like not like immigrant workers or not like black workers. This is not in our interest. It will be more in our interest if we all work together. What was that light bulb moment?
Yeah, I think there's two potential explanations in union leaders' minds. One's the more sort of strategic, cynical answer, which is still cool, which is that they saw, okay, there's an increased number of black industrial workers coming to, for example, northern cities in the Great Migration by the 1930s, and the Depression was on, and to keep labor unions powerful and expand their power, they would try to create interracial labor unions to expand their memberships. That's one reason. Another is this more just principle-based reason that you see very clearly that divisions based on race are going to hurt class politics and really just economic justice for people in the U.S., period.
Right. And you also mentioned when we were talking earlier about the role that that the labor movement and organized labor has played in partisan politics. And you mentioned during this period, we can call it like a renaissance, or it wasn't like a renewing necessarily, but like this really powerful interracial solidarity movement within organized labor, within the House of Labor, that really brought people together. And in the 50s and 60s, we had nearly 30-something% of workers unionized, and so there was this very strong class politics, and that has kind of been switched for something else. Can you tell us what that was and how that switch happened in the partisan political landscape?
So since the 1970s, labor union density, labor union membership has declined, massively. And this was intentional, right, by, politicians and corporate forces really didn't want workers to be organized, and they got major businesses got really involved in politics by the late 70s and onwards. They helped to crush labor unions, for example, in the 1980s. As labor unions were diminishing, then this labor power was less evident in politics. And what replaced it was strategic on the part of some of these politicians who wanted people to not focus on labor issues, not threaten their corporate power to get paid higher wages and have better health care and job security. They wanted people to focus on cultural resentment issues and identity resentment issues. So after the 1980s, we saw the increase of this sort of cultural backlash politics, for example, and we see that now. So it's clear statistically, again, if you're in political science and you do these statistics, you can tell more about how somebody's going to vote based on how they feel about Colin Kaepernick than you can based on how they feel about health care and the minimum wage and class policies, economic policies like that. We're in a moment where politics is overwhelmingly cultural and about cultural resentment, that we really dislike certain people we see on TV, and we hope we can elect people that, talk trash on those people who we dislike on TV. And that has replaced sort of solidarity-based labor politics to the detriment of working class people. And since the 70s, we've seen a huge rise of it. We've seen the middle class stagnate, where there's been no new wealth for the middle class, and yet the sort of billionaire class has swollen its wealth, many times since over the past generation. And that's not an accident. That was part of destroying the labor movement.
Right. That and you know, I think that people don't really recognize the extent to which both of the major parties really do this. They want to talk about these cultural issues rather than talking about the bread and butter issues about healthcare, wages, retirements, pensions, because it's so much easier to like paint Black Lives Matter on a street than it is to actually reform the police department. Identity politics in both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party has kind of replaced a sort of class politics that the labor movement was very active in creating in the middle of the 20th century. And so was there any other thoughts that you wanted to add to that?
No, I just thought before the break you summarized it really nicely. So one there's a couple things to highlight in what you said. One is that so there's sort of two versions of identity politics going on and sort of cultural resentment politics. One is at least the Democratic Party establishment really likes symbolic gestures about anti-racism, anti-homophobia, and sort of anti-misogyny messaging without much material backing to it. So, for example, a policy like Medicare for All or higher minimum wage or stronger labor power for unions, that would help. That would certainly help African Americans and other people of color in the U.S. tremendously, but those don't appear on the agenda as much as some symbolic policies sometimes. On the Republican side, you have, I think Donald Trump encapsulates this best, where the sort of stereotype we have in our head is that his base is the white working class former union member, like a out of work coal miner, whereas his policies in office have been nothing but giving red meat to the billionaire class, massive high-end tax cuts and other things like that. And what he has done strategically really well is cause people to vote based on cultural resentment and a sort of white identity politics rather than look at the policies, look at his attempts to cut healthcare and wages and transfer a ton of money upward to the billionaire class.
Right, and again, you mentioned in your paper... Oh, what were you saying?
Yeah, the decline of labor movements is just key in this.
Right, and you mentioned in your paper that W.E.B. Du Bois called the phenomenon of white workers being pro-slavery despite the fact that it decreased their free labor, the white workers' labor, because they're competing with free labor. And so today we kind of have a psychological wage where people are voting for Trump so that he can make the right people angry rather than actually make their lives materially better. I don't think it's exactly the same. It's a little different, but it's still a psychological wage. No, you're not actually, your life is not getting better. You're just you're just experiencing Schadenfreude. Because
exactly. You don't get, your health care is cut and you lose your job, but at least you own the lib.
Right.
Am I right?
Right. That's exactly right. So, we're talking about this as if it's the implication is that this is bad. It is bad that identity politics has taken over from a class politics that the labor movement helped to invigorate in the middle of the 20th century. And so, as somebody who I don't think you primarily see yourself as like a union activist. I think you primarily see yourself as like a researcher, an academic, somebody like that. But so and I'm assuming you're in the union at the University of Washington, but as somebody who's nominally on the outside, like this isn't like what you think about day in and day out, what would you tell labor leaders to do to reinvigorate that class politics and try to shift the conversation from these cultural, psychological wages to to real wages, to real material benefits for working people?
So I do think, to some extent, labor unions are doing the right thing. So we found as evidence sort of some of these solidarity-based trainings that unions do, and some of this has declined. So the AFL-CIO used to have sort of larger organizer and steward trainings than they do now. There's things the labor union can double down on. I love the idea of more small d democratic unions where the rank and file has a greater voice, all of that. But again, I'm not on the ground. I have family history in the labor movement, and personally have dabbled in working with unions. But you're right, I'm on the outside, so I'm trying to get this. Basically, what I did was help to statistically demonstrate, I think, what a lot of labor organizers knew. But I'm looking for both you guys and organizers on the ground for insights about sort of the next big push. But I would say for political candidates, really thinking that if you are interested in voting or running for office and things like that, there's a tension often you hear, either focus on anti-racism or focus on class politics like unions. However, that's a false choice that actually, if you think about, it's really the idea of race and class together is the fundamental building blocks of sort of U.S. struggle and politics. And the labor movement combines those to build a robust sort of class politics for everybody and interracial solidarity that can really build a stronger middle class.
That's exactly that's. I completely agree with that. And you mentioned something about more small d democratic unions. And this is something that Jane McAlevey really pushes in her books. And it makes a lot of sense. Making a union more small d democratic, where it's practicable, which is in a lot of areas, is just almost like a silver bullet for so many issues. It's a silver bullet for corruption. If members have more control over their leaders, the leaders are not going to be corrupt. One of the reasons that the UAW was able to become so corrupt at the top is because the people at the top removed a lot of the checks and balances the membership had on them. So if you increase democracy in unions, if you increase the ability of members to have a say over the way that their unions are run, then you obviously decrease corruption, but you're going to help make the unions more more of an anti-racist union, because it's not in the interest of the workers to be racist. So that's definitely a really good thing that I think that a lot of good organizers would agree with. We've got a couple of minutes left in the interview, so could you just tell us kind of, you alluded to it a little bit, but tell us what made you want to do this study? What made you want to look into this?
So, yeah, I've long been interested in these issues of sort of race and class together. But personally, so my grandfather, my mom's dad, was a newspaper editor for black newspapers like the Michigan Chronicle and then the Chicago Defender in the mid-century. And he was on sort of the labor beat and was really interested in integrating labor unions to become an interracial force for the working and middle class in places like Chicago and Detroit. So that was a powerful influence. Moving forward, just in my childhood, growing up in a city, seeing people without health insurance, seeing just the need for thinking about race and class together, all the way to interning for the union Unite Here, which is a mostly hotel and some restaurant workers unions out on the West Coast. All of those really informed my interest in this, And again, we just do, in political science and social science, we do a tremendous amount of sort of work on people's psychology and how they vote and things like that. There's not enough work quantitatively on the role of labor unions.
Alrighty, folks, we're going to take our last break here. We will be right back with a couple more clips, and then we're going to head out of here.
Energy Alabama supports consumers and is a leader in advocating for them. We have been able to successfully fight off utility rate increases in the state, reduce fees for electric vehicles, increase electric vehicle infrastructure spending, and secured a $100 million refund by Alabama Power after the utility overcharged customers for fuel. To learn more about our work advocating for customers and join the fight, go to energyalabama.org.
There's a lot of talk about a shortage of workers, but that's not the case with IBW 558. We have provided our customers over 3,000 workers and performed over 3 million man-hours in a pandemic year. With 8,000 OJT hours, 900 classroom hours, OSHA 30, and a state license, our members receive the equivalent of a master's degree. That's what makes IBW 558 the right choice for your electrical needs. Look us up at Facebook or at IBW558.org.
North Alabama DSA is looking for folks to work for a better North Alabama.
They prioritize mutual aid, municipal activism, and union solidarity. Contact them on social media or dsanorthalabama@gmail for more information.
Support for this program is provided by the International Association for Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama. Learn more at iamaw44.org.
Hometown Action is a grassroots organization building a multiracial working class movement for racial, gender, economic, and environmental justice in Alabama's rural communities. We stand in solidarity with Alabama workers and are proud to support the Valley Labor Report's efforts to inform and build the Southern worker movement. Please visit hometownaction.org and follow our social media channels at Hometown Action to learn more about how you too can get involved to make the South a better place for all workers. Solidarity, y'all.
Support for this program also comes from the Iron Workers, Local 477. So if you are looking for contractors with lower than average EMR and TRIR, they tell me that if you need to know what those mean, then you will. Or if you need to supplement a workforce at any level for any amount of time, short or long term, if you need iron workers that come trained and certified at no extra cost, or if you need workers from superintendent down to general laborer, and you're looking to start work on a project, or you're unhappy with your current contractor situation, you need to call my friend Jeb Miles with the Ironworkers Local 477. They only work with the best in the business, vetted contractors, and can do all kinds of jobs, from roofing to steel and bridge erection, from welding to heavy rigging, from structural repairs to machinery alignment, and much more. They supply manpower on 4 of the 5 largest projects in North Alabama, so you know they're legit. If you need good quality, safe, efficient, diligent, and knowledgeable workers on your job, then you need the Ironworkers Local 477. Call Jeb Miles at 256-383-3334 or via email at local477@bellsouth.net, and make sure you tell them that you heard about them on the Valley Labor Report.
We're the nurses, firefighters, and claims representatives that help keep our government services running. We respond to natural disasters. We care for our nation's veterans, and we investigate discrimination in the workplace. We are federal and D.C. government workers, and we are proud to serve the American people. Working in more than 70 agencies across the government, we know we can fulfill our mission because our union has our back. Learn more at afge.org. Paid for by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO.
Support for this program also comes from the Mid-South Council of Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Learn more at rwdsu.info.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Alabama's only union talk radio show. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. We are not live today. We are bringing you the best of the Valley Labor Report. But if you've got anything to add, you can give us a call or send us a text. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. We might read your comments sent to that number or play your voicemail on the next program. So here we've got a clip from the summer of 2022, this past summer, that is also sadly still relevant, as just last week we received news that now 4 Hyundai facilities in Alabama have been confirmed to be using child labor, with an additional 6 being investigated. Here's our first discussion of the issue immediately after reports were made public back in July.
Let's get to some local news. This went incredibly viral last week. And it's genuinely insane news coming out of Reuters yesterday. Came out yesterday thanks to reporters Joshua Schneier, Micah Rosenberg, and Christina Cook.
about child labor at the Hyundai facility in Alabama. Let's go to their report. Underage workers, in some cases as young as 12, have recently worked at a metal stamping plant operated by Smart Alabama LLC, these people said. Smart, listed by Hyundai in corporate filings as a majority-owned unit, supplies parts for some of the most popular cars and SUVs built by the automaker in Montgomery, its flagship U.S. assembly plant. And we aren't talking about kids working in kid-friendly environments either. You know, I mean, they really shouldn't be working at all or only in very limited circumstances. Kids should be learning, having fun in school, being kids. But we are not talking about kid-friendly environments. We're not talking about going down, to the family farm and milking a cow or, just some menial tasks in a safe location. That's not what's happening at this plant. A Reuters review of the records shows that Smart has been assessed with at least $48,515 in OSHA penalties since just 2013. In less than 10 years, we're talking about $50,000 in fines from OSHA, which $50,000 is not a lot, but when you think about how much OSHA can actually fine or does actually fine, especially under a Republican administration, $50,000 is a lot of money from OSHA. It indicates a big safety problem. And it was most recently filed just in the last year, in 2022. OSHA inspections at Smart have documented violations including crush and amputation hazards at the facility. Now, this is not more crazy or disgusting than the original article of children working at facilities with amputation hazards. But get this. The Attorney General's office has known about this since at least February. 5 months. 5 months Steve Marshall has known about child labor in Alabama. And his office had no comments to give to the Reuters reporters about whether or not there would be prosecutions in the case. Can you just imagine that? Having known about literal child labor in Alabama for 5 months, and that is not enough time to be able to tell reporters whether or not you're going to be doing prosecutions. Quoting from the article, Reuters learned of underage workers at the Hyundai-owned supplier following the brief disappearance in February of a Guatemalan migrant child from her family's home in Alabama. The police force in Enterprise, which is about 45 miles from the plant in Laverne, doesn't have jurisdiction to investigate possible labor law violations at the factory. Instead, the force notified the state attorney general's office after the incident. James Sanders, an Enterprise police detective, told Reuters. Mike Lewis, a spokesperson at the Alabama Attorney General's office, declined to comment. It's unclear whether the office or other investigators have contacted Smart or Hyundai about possible violations. 5 months! 5 months! They're sitting on this story for 5 months. The Attorney General's office has known about this issue for 5 months, and the only reason we know about it is because of Reuters. The only reason we know about it is because of Reuters. Let's contrast this total and complete lack of urgency, lack of moral clarity, lack of giving a damn about Hyundai exploiting children in a plant in Alabama with amputation hazards with his recent comments on Google. The Attorney General of the state of Alabama, the highest enforcer of the law in the state, unprompted, nobody asked him to do this, joined a letter with other state attorneys general who also apparently have nothing else better to do, stating that if Google does not give them the search results they want, they might sue. I mean, talk about
priorities.
I mean, good God. Talk about misplaced priorities. What about abortion? What's his urgency been like on this issue? Well, according to Parker Snyder, yet another columnist for Koch-funded, flat earth, military coup, crypto bro boosting propaganda outlet 1819 News, around 9:15 a.m. on Friday, June 24th, news of the court's decision in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization overruling Roe v. Wade reached Alabama. At 10:37 a.m., Alabama Attorney General Steve Marshall released a statement promising that his office was immediately filing motions to dissolve any injunctions against, quote, pro-life bills held up in the court system. These would have to be dissolved before pro-life measures could go into effect in Alabama. It took 82 minutes. 82 minutes. Less than 2 hours for him to jump into action to ensure that the law that will force children in Alabama to carry incest, rape, pregnancies to term, to use the force of the state to impose his religious views on the bodies of others, less than 82 minutes for him to jump into action to enforce that policy. Yet after 5 months, almost half a year, they did not have a position that they could tell the press on the issue of child labor in a plant with rampant safety issues, to include amputation hazards. Much less having actually done anything about this specific issue or anything proactively to ensure safe working conditions for adults and to ensure enforcement of child labor law for minors. After 5 months, they had nothing that they could tell the press. Nothing at all.
It's just ridiculous.
And of course, like, I do want to make clear, just so that you, the listener, don't get the idea that this is some crazy idea that actually it's somebody else's jurisdiction to enforce child labor laws or anything else like that it's not in his wheelhouse, or even that there is no precedent. There absolutely is. I want to share this from you. Terry Gerstein for the Economic Policy Institute last year put together a really good report on how district attorneys and state attorneys general are fighting for workers. And in this case, children. She reports that state and local prosecutors have been bringing charges in a range of cases, including wage theft, misclassification of workers as independent contractors, payroll fraud, failure to pay unemployment insurance taxes, workers' compensation insurance fraud, labor trafficking, egregious workplace safety and health violations, workplace sexual assault, witness tampering, and retaliation. And we aren't just seeing these cases in a handful of places either. We're seeing them in California, Colorado, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Montana, New Jersey, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Texas, Virginia, Washington. This isn't just out there kooky liberal stuff enforcing the law, enforcing laws that protect workers. And some jurisdictions are even going a step further in creating separate departments solely for worker protections, like San Diego DA Summer Stefan in 2021, like Queens DA Melinda Katz, like San Francisco DA Chesa Boudin in 2020, like Philadelphia DA Larry Krasner in 2019. Yet here in Alabama, a literal child labor case can sit in the Attorney General's office for 5 months and nobody know about it and nothing be done about it. It's insane.
It is. And like you said, it's a reflection of the priorities that we have from the Attorney General's office. And I think it really speaks to Alabama's issues in terms of law enforcement on behalf of working class people, and on behalf of children. We have child labor laws for a reason. We have minimum wage laws and overtime laws for a reason.
Right.
But those laws are only as good as they are enforced. And it's very clear that the state of Alabama has no interest in enforcing any laws that might actually help ordinary working people. Now, as you said, like, they will rush to go get their name in the press, to go get their name on Fox News, to jump into the latest controversy. It took, less than 90 minutes to get involved in the abortion issue as soon as the Supreme Court made their decision. But you can't do anything about children literally risking their life and limb right in your backyard. I mean, this is in the Montgomery area.
Yeah.
It's not even the other part of the state here.
He could probably walk to the place.
Right.
It would be a little bit of a trek. But apparently he doesn't have anything else better to do because he's getting ready to sue Google because it's not giving him the search results he wants. Right. So he's got the time, clearly.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was just so many issues that came up when you read this article from Reuters, and if you haven't read it yet, I just can't recommend it enough. But it speaks to the issues with our Attorney General, as you just laid out. It speaks to the lack of law enforcement when it comes to labor law. And our labor law, as we've discussed frequently on this show, is not sufficient. It is not good enough for working class people in this country. But even what we do have is insufficiently enforced. It speaks to the role of temp agencies in these sort of settings, because, of course, Hyundai is going to push the blame off to the temporary staffing agency that they claim they were using here, that brought these children in as workers. And anyone who's familiar with the auto industry or the auto parts supply chain industry knows that these temp staff agencies are a huge presence. And folks are often kind of told about, oh, we've got a new Toyota plant, we've got a new Hyundai plant, there's all these good jobs that are coming.
Right.
And then lo and behold, many of those people are actually funneled through staffing agencies where the work is temporary, it's precarious, it doesn't get the same amount of pay or benefits that the full-time folks are getting. And the use of these staffing agencies presents a major problem when it comes to situations like this, where an employer isn't even verifying who the hell they're employing.
Right. In the Reuters report, and Adam, we got a comment that says your audio is very quiet, but they can hear me, so
okay.
Maybe work on that. But the in the Reuters report, the they talk about how they asked Hyundai for a comment, and Hyundai said something to the effect of, "Oh, we follow the law, blah blah blah," and basically we expect our contractors to also follow the law, and it shows exactly, when you've got a 12-year-old girl working in your facility, that's not something that you can just say like, "Oh, well, I didn't know. I expected my contract." Like, you can just literally look and see.
Somebody knew.
Yes, somebody knew. And in the report, they talked to several workers who said they worked with dozens of minors in this facility. So this was clearly an issue. This was clearly an issue that these Reuters investigators, who are not paid by the state of Alabama, were able to find out. And yet, the Alabama Attorney General has known about this for 5 months. And nothing. We're not seeing anything about arrests of the bosses at this plant. We're not seeing anything about fines. We're not seeing anything about civil penalties. Nothing. Nothing at all from politicians in Montgomery about this. And of course, the second that workers try to come together and fix it themselves, politicians in Montgomery either would be absent or actively opposed to their organization.
Yeah, and one last thing I wanted to say on this is like, this is just another example of why it's so important that we have solidarity with our migrant brothers and sisters, because we see where immigrants are hyper exploited and where employers use their precarious situations, their lack of legal status in some cases, their poverty status, their refugee status. Employers prey upon folks who are fleeing often terrible situations in their home countries and risking their lives to come over here to the United States just to try to make a better life for themselves. Right. And I know that there are those in the right-wing media who would love to divide and conquer working class people and love to have native-born Americans, pitted against migrants. But the way forward is through solidarity and recognizing that it doesn't do us any good as American workers to have other workers who are preyed upon because of their immigration status. At the end of the day, we're all in this together. We're all trying to sell our labor in order to survive, and we're all facing exploitation and oppression. So I think I just wanted to emphasize that before we move on from this story, is that it's very, very important that we not allow ourselves to be divided by immigration.
Right.
The employers love to bring people over that they can exploit and that they can use the threat of ICE and deportation against, that they can silence. And the key, the task for us in the labor movement is to organize. Mm-hmm. Is to organize these workers, to bring them into our movement and join together in solidarity.
Right. Yeah, these employers, they don't want open borders. They want borders just open enough that people can come in, but not so open that they have rights.
Right.
They
absolutely.
want people to be able to come in without rights that they can exploit, and that if they get too uppity, they can call ICE
and deport their entire family.
Yeah, and deport their entire family and be thugs for the boss, which is basically, especially under the Trump administration, what ICE was more or less reduced to: thugs
absolutely.
for the boss.
Yeah, and even for more white collar workers, when you're talking about visas.
Right.
Employer
totally dependent.
visas.
Yeah, totally dependent on the employer.
So the immigration system is not set up to be beneficial for the immigrants themselves or for American workers either.
Right. Yeah, it definitely doesn't help us.
It's for the benefit of bosses.
Yeah. So just really, really, really disgusting story out of Alabama, out of Montgomery.
Yet again, the state of Alabama making national news for a disgrace.
Yeah.
We deserve better leaders in this state.
Yeah. A few people in the chat, Jeb says, rather than direct hiring, these suppliers also use third-party staffing agencies, often classified as independent contractors, just to skirt labor laws and keep themselves off the radar.
Right.
That's exactly what happened here.
And when something bad happens like this, when they get caught,
point the finger.
They can pass the buck.
Yeah.
Blame it on a staffing agency instead of taking accountability for their own actions.
Yeah, and these aren't this thing isn't happening at union plants. Strom says, I'm honestly not that surprised. Southern automobile parts suppliers are nightmares. Look at how BMW contracts hiring out to MAU in South Carolina. People working as, quote, temps for several years.
Mm-hmm.
Strom also says the Nissan plant in Canton, Mississippi has some crazy stuff like that going on, too. Yeah.
We're rounding out the main show today with a plea from co-host Adam Keller to get involved in your community in whatever way that may be, whether you become a union activist, you become a member of DSA or a local political party. Just do something to get involved. Adam is going to make a much more coherent plea than I am, so I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to him.
Since we talked about going back to the basics, if you are a person who is upset at the state of the world, what can you do? So I wanted to just share some thoughts, take a moment of personal privilege to address that. And when we look at the conditions in which we're living, you don't need me to tell you that we face crisis upon crisis upon crisis. It's easy to look at these conditions and follow the news and feel discouraged, depressed, angry, anxious, or alienated. The forces of exploitation and oppression are counting on us being paralyzed by these feelings. To borrow from Jesse Jackson, they win by the margin of our despair, by the margin of the fracture of our coalition. So never forget that there are people in this world, in this country, in this state, and in your community who believe we can and must do better. Perhaps the most profound lesson of American history is that change comes from the bottom up, and we, the people, have had to organize and fight for every inch of progress. And not only do everyday working people have to fight to move us forward, we have always had to fight to keep from moving backwards. The forces of exploitation and oppression will always have more money, more force, more structural power. The counter that we have is people power. We have to look back at the movements of the 60s, the 30s, the turn of the century, and examine the ways they built and exercised people power. The challenge now and for the future is to build an organized, diverse working class movement of our own that can grow and use the people power necessary for a better world. So what can you do and how? The most simple answer is we do something together. Everyone listening right now has something to contribute to the movement, whether it's your time, your energy, your skills, or your donations. But do it collectively. If you're listening, I bet you have at least one person in your life who at least has the potential to be a comrade in the struggle. Someone you will fight for, someone who will fight for you, and someone who will join you in fighting for folks y'all don't even know. Now, on this show, we believe the labor movement is the key component. So we encourage everyone to get involved in organizing at the workplace, strengthening and reforming your unions, and of course, establishing new unions. Make that list of your coworkers and start having one-on-one conversations. But we can't stop there. We have to keep going. Maybe you're interested in mutual aid. Maybe you're interested in electoral campaigns and get out the vote efforts. Maybe you're interested in policy reform and advocacy. Maybe you're interested in popular education and training. Maybe you're interested in protests and other forms of direct action. Or maybe you're interested in community and issue-based organizing. I'm not going to tell you where or how you should do something, just that you should do it and do it together with others. Because there are good people doing good work on all of those fronts, and they all need more help. With that in mind, I wanted to share some ideas on where to get started. If you are a worker and not a boss, you can join the IWW, Industrial Workers of the World. That's an easy way to get involved in the labor movement, regardless of whether unions exist in your area or industry. DSA in North Alabama is trying to establish a chapter here and could use some folks. And the Birmingham DSA chapter has been doing some really good work punching above their weight. United Women of Color and the Citizens Coalition for Justice Reform are doing important work on criminal justice issues here in Huntsville. The Tennessee Valley Progressive Alliance is a network of local activists and organizers. And in fact, they actually have a meeting coming up Wednesday night at 5:30 at the downtown Huntsville Library, if you want to put that on your calendar. Hometown Action, friends of the show, they are organizing at the state and local level across Alabama with an emphasis on rural communities. The Huntsville Bail Fund is a critical resource for our local activist movement, particularly considering the riot police that we have to deal with here in Huntsville. NASO, the North Alabama School for Organizers, offers local training and conducts mutual aid. And then there are some nonprofits in Alabama that are doing some really important work that could always use volunteers and, of course, donations. Personally, I'm a proud member of Alabama Arise, which does a variety of advocacy and policy work, particularly around poverty. Alabama Coalition for Immigrant Justice and the Adelante Worker Center are doing important work. There's our legal friends at Alabama Appleseed. There's Energy Alabama and GASP doing important environmental work. And these were just some of the ones off the top of my head. I know that I'm leaving some out, and I'm sure there are plenty more. Find organizations you can support. Find activities you can get involved in. Find strike funds and causes you can donate to. And most importantly, grow your network of comrades. A better world is possible, but only when we come together and organize a movement that can fight for it.
I definitely want to second all of that. It's so important to understand that politics is not consumption, is not, entertainment. It's not who your favorite, Twitch streamer is or debate bro or whatever. It's not even your favorite politician. Politics properly understood is what you're doing in your community to make it better, to make your life better, to make the life of your sisters and brothers on the job and in the community better. That's what politics is. And you can be as pure as you want as far as understanding, Rawlsian or Marxist theory. But having ideas in your head isn't enough. You've got to go and do something. Faith without works is dead. So go out and do some works.
Amen.
All right, folks, that is going to be it for the best of the Valley Labor Report here on the radio. As we are rounding out the program, don't forget about our UMWA sisters and brothers down in Brookwood. You can support the striking families by donating to their Strike Pantry Fund. That is paypal.me/UMWA Strike Pantry. Obed Edom has a new album, Done Up in Jade Like Green Waters. Check it out on their Bandcamp. That is Obed Edom. Again, you can leave us a voicemail at 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. You can buy our merch or give us money on our website. That's tvlr.fm. And don't forget to like, subscribe. I don't know how many people are how many folks are watching us live, but if you're watching us live, you should definitely be subscribed to our YouTube channel, and you should like the stream and share us with people that you think might also be interested. We're going to be continuing to walk down memory lane in overtime. So if you're listening to us on the radio and you want to continue hanging out, then you can find us online on Facebook and YouTube. We're going to continue the show there. All power to the workers. Alrighty, folks, we got rid of those people on the radio. Howdy, howdy. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for staying with us. We've got some great clips lined up for you in overtime today, including our interview from over a year ago about black radical organizing in Alabama with Robin D.G. Kelly. So we're going to take a short break and be right back. Welcome back. You are still listening to the Valley Labor Report, Alabama's only union talk radio program. We are now in overtime, and like I said, folks, we have got some great clips for you. First up, we've got a clip from when we were back in the Athens studio. This is probably over 2 years ago now, where I destroy, with facts and logic, somebody who tweeted a dumb thing at me. Enjoy.
We got a tweet from David, said... So silly. David said, right to work keeps oppressive unions from mandating its terms onto the entire workforce. Unions don't care about the workers, the customer, the product, the company, or the stockholders. They only care about enriching themselves and increasing their own power. I mean, this is just like it's silly, right? It's silly because so there are a couple things to know about right to work, that and the fact that and the people who are pushing it constantly rail on freeloaders, specifically with regards to undocumented immigrants. They hate people who they ostensibly hate when people take advantage of benefits that they did not pay into. When you are in a right to work environment and you are represented by a union and you do not pay dues, you take advantage of the representation that a union brings you. And the representation that unions bring you is just objectively, it makes your we can see, like, we can look at the data. One of the things that folks like to say is facts don't care about your feelings. Okay, well, let's look at the facts. We can see that union workers make more. They have higher wages, something on the order of 14 to 25% higher wages. We can see that they have better benefits. They pay less for more health care. They have better retirements. Union workers are basically the only ones in this country that still have pensions. Where we don't have pensions, we still have better retirement plans. Unions create safer work environments. Union workplaces have something on the order of 80% fewer fatalities. Union nursing homes during the pandemic had a 40% lower patient mortality rate than non-union nursing homes. And this fellow's telling us that unions don't care about the customers. The patients in these nursing homes are the customers, and they die 40% less in union nursing homes. And the reason for that is because when these caretakers are able to have a voice on the job, they don't get, you don't go into nursing home work to get rich, right? You care about the people that you care about the work. And so when workers like nurses, like people in nursing homes, have the capability to speak for themselves, to have a voice on the job, they create safer working environments. And same with teachers. Their working environment is the students' learning environment. And so what are the things that teachers fight for? Much more often than not, along with raises, which they absolutely deserve, and everybody can agree that teachers do not make enough in this country, even harder than they fight for raises, they fight for smaller classroom sizes. They fight for more equipment in the classroom. They fight for nurses in schools. They fight for counselors in the schools, because they care about their communities. They care about their students. And it's just absurd on its face to believe that unions don't care about the communities and the patients and the customers. Unions, to say that unions don't care about the company, obviously there's some amount of tension there, which is right and good, because when executives, the profit is literally money that we workers create that we don't get. Okay, so what the executives make in profit is just wages that we don't get, wages that they take from us. But of course, if you don't have a company, then you don't have you don't have a job. Workers go out of their way. Like this I really have so little patience for this nonsense narrative of workers and unions being greedy, because we can look at the 2008 financial crisis and what did the workers give up that worked for the big three in the UAW, that worked for Ford and GM and Chevrolet. They gave up wages, they gave up benefits, they gave up health care to save the company. And on top of what the workers sacrificed, us as an American people paid for a bailout for these companies. And what did the executives sacrifice? Nothing. The executives didn't sacrifice a damn thing. They took bonuses after they received their bailouts. So I have no patience for this nonsense narrative about workers and unions being greedy, when the same executives at the same time, workers and their countrymen, are sacrificing to keep the companies afloat. They're taking bonuses, and it's like, get a grip. Get a grip, okay? I mean, like, it's absurd. And so, you know, the idea that right to work is the idea that right to work is just about unions wanting to build their power for its own sake. Of course we want to build our power, but why do we want to build our power? Because we want better lives for our members, for ourselves, and for our communities. Right to work is just something to divide the working class. Right to work is just something to destroy worker power and shore up corporate power. It is the government. And the other thing is that, folks that advocate right to work say that they hate freeloading, of course, unless it's workers freeloading off of non-members freeloading off of union representation. They also say that they hate government intervention in the free market. They hate government intervention in contracts. They hate government intervention in working conditions. There are a myriad of conditions that you agree to have a job. You have, there's all sorts of conditions of employment that workplaces require. They require you to have degrees. They require you to have a uniform. They require you to have transportation. They require you to look a certain way. They require you to talk a certain way. All sorts of things that conservative free market types have no problem with. When workers get enough power in a workplace to mandate one thing as a condition of employment that employers and employees freely agree to, that one thing being you have to pay for the representation that a union provides, and thus this condition of employment being a condition that increases worker power, that is the only condition of employment that conservatives and Republicans have a problem with. Ask yourself why that is. Why is it that literally the only condition of employment that these free market fundamentalists have a problem with is the one condition of employment in America that we have that shores up worker power? Okay? And once you ask yourself why that is, and you answer honestly, the answer is that they don't actually have a principled commitment to free markets. They don't actually have a principled commitment to the freedom of private entities to agree to contracts. The reason is that they want to destroy worker power. They don't want us to get uppity. They don't want us to believe that we deserve better lives. They want us to be quiet and docile, and they want us to accept what we're given and to just accept it, and to be meek little servants that will do whatever they say without putting up a fight. That's what they want. Okay.
More seriously, here is our interview with Robin D.G. Kelly, where we discuss his book about black radical organizing in Alabama. The book is titled Hammer and Hoe. This conversation is from, I believe it was the summer of 2021. Maybe it was the fall of 2021. It's been a little over a year ago. Fascinating conversation. Gonna have to get him back on the show at some point, but I really enjoyed it. I know that y'all will too. Here it is.
as a Union Talk radio show host, I'm all the time getting asked for kind of a historical context, and every time I'm asked for that, I always reference Hammer and Hoe. And so the author of that work is Dr. Robin Kelly. So I thought, who better to talk to about this than him? So Dr. Kelly, thank you so much for being willing to talk to us tonight.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
So Dr. Kelly, I think the first thing that would be I think the audience would want to know is the Hammer and Hoe is the history of the Alabama Communist Party during the Depression era. What made you interested in studying like such a ostensibly niche topic? What was it that the Alabama Communist Party, of all things, made you want to study them?
That's a great question, because my dissertation advisor asked the same question. In fact, I think he used the term niche topic. And I think his joke was actually more of disparaging my project was, you have to write a dissertation more than 50 pages. My dissertation, by the way, was about 698 pages. And my road to this project really was through the political work I was doing back in the 1980s. I mean, my dissertation was written in 87. The book came out, revised version, in 1990. So it's really 30 years. And it was a time when in the late 80s, when a lot of us were involved in left organizing. In my case, I was in Los Angeles, involved with the anti-apartheid movement, and I was actually writing about South Africa. My field was African history. And so I was looking at the left in South Africa and its history, and it dawned on me after I'd read this magnificent book it's basically Hosea Hudson's life story put together by the great historian Nell Painter, which is basically his memoir, oral memoir of Hosea Hudson. Hosea Hudson was a leading communist in Alabama at the time and was still alive, living in Gainesville, Florida. And it was reading that book and reading about the Sharecroppers Union that made me think, the stuff I'm doing in South Africa sounds very similar. So my proposal at the time was to look at South Africa and the U.S. South and the left. The South African government helped me decide to work in Alabama because in 1986, I wasn't getting into the country. I'll never forget the day I went to the South African consulate, with my visa application, and they'd see me there protesting, and the woman behind the glass was like just laughing at me. Like, why would you even think about applying to go there? So that took the South Africa part out of it temporarily. But what it did was it left me with Alabama. And I was going to look at the whole South, but Alabama was really the heart of the party's work, precisely because they were very strong in the Birmingham Bessemer area. Mm-hmm. They wanted to build an industrial, unionized, class movement. And it's funny because they didn't think they would be as successful as they were in the rural areas, in places like Tallapoosa County, Montgomery County, Lowndes County. But instead, they knew Birmingham Bessemer area was the place. So I basically followed the documents. I went, did a lot of research, talked to a lot of people, and put together this book. And again, the context is important because when I was writing it, it was on the verge of the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Soviet experiment, Eastern Bloc countries. It was at a moment when we had a decade of, Reaganism and Bushism, which is really, Reagan begins the decade with this first attack on the Air Traffic Controllers Union. I mean, it's just the anti-unionism, especially a union that actually endorsed Reagan, which is kind of an amazing thing. So this was a moment when many of us were doing this kind of work, trying to, labor with labor. And the Communist Party in Alabama just seemed like a great place to study the questions. And specifically, the question that I was posing was, how do you build a multiracial radical movement that in an area where the crux of the work class is mostly Black, and you have a bastion of white supremacy? Like, how do you do that? Mm-hmm. And the thing that I have to say I learned, which for a lot of people of my generation and after was pretty shocking, is how successful the party was. And not just the party, but all the other organizations it had a relationship with, whether it's the union movement, International Labor Defense, whether it's looking at the Sharecroppers Union, that they really did do a great job. And the amazing thing is, despite being a kind of bastion of white supremacy, which I would say all of America is, you had some amazing white working class radicals who came out, risked their lives, lost their lives in some cases, to fight on behalf of the class, of the working class. And that's, to me, a lesson that we have to continue to go back to always, because there's a sense of almost, I wouldn't say complacency, but sort of dread that there's no possible way that you can build a multiracial movement again, that those days are over, and they were never really that powerful anyway. But I think that the party, the story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy. And it's a reminder, and something I've always argued, that people are too quick to write off the South. I mean, when I remember when the last president was elected, and all my colleagues here at UCLA, and people in LA were all like self-congratulatory about, oh, well, California didn't go for Trump, and we're so progressive, though we have the largest prison population in the country, but we're so progressive, and we're the left coast, and they wrote off the South. And I'm like, you don't understand that the South has always been the Achilles heel for American capitalism. I mean, when you really look at it, from Reconstruction on down, this is where movements would take place. And sure enough, it's like the first place where Amazon is going to finally have, the corporation is going to have to deal with a union, a real union, is going to be in Alabama.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's, you said a few things there that the timing of the writing of your book, you started doing the writing in right after the fall of right after the fall of the Soviet Union. I mean, that, today writing this book there's certainly a resurgence of kind of the anti-capitalist left. And so it wouldn't be, somebody writing a history of the Alabama Communist Party today, like, it wouldn't really get, it wouldn't be that abnormal, so to speak, but writing, publishing it in what was it, the late 90s or early 2000s, I could imagine that you got a couple of looks about that.
No, but it's not 1990, which is also strange. I mean, it came out in 1990, which is exactly, but you're right. I mean, you think about 89, 90, 91. This is where this is basically the fall of the Eastern Bloc, but you're right. It's also
the end of history.
Yeah, the so-called end of history, exactly. Where to talk about communism was just like, people look at you funny. But to be truthful, and this is also the case in Birmingham in that period of time, because I have a lot of friends and comrades who were there in the late 80s. Believe it or not, there was a kind of resurgence of the left beginning late 70s, early 80s. And it was after the Greensboro massacre, for example, where four members of the Communist Workers' Party and then one person who wasn't a member but was very close to the party was shot and killed by the Klan and by Nazis. And that didn't actually dampen the left. It actually led to even more formation. So that for those of us who were inside that world, if I gave you the list of all the communists, Marxist-Leninists, Trotskyists, Marxist-Leninist, Maoist organizations that emerged, I'd be here all day.
Right.
There's so many. It just sort of took off. It wasn't a mass movement, but just to say that inside those circles, even if we saw the writing on the wall, even if we knew that the Soviet experiment, because none of us was really sort of supporting the Soviet experiment. It wasn't really, it was no longer considered like a progressive move, but we did believe that socialism was still possible in the United States, you know, and that shifted.
That's interesting that you noted that there was a massacre that kind of kicked off a mini left resurgence during the time that you were writing this book, because as I read the history in your book, a similar thing happened with the strength of the Alabama Communist Party, because which is the Scottsboro Boys, right? Can you tell us a little bit about that? And you know, I think a lot of folks know some about the story of the Scottsboro Boys, but they don't know how the Communist Party was involved, which they were, you know, really the only ones kind of pushing it at the time. Some of the more mainstream liberal type organizations, the NAACP, they weren't really touching it. Talk to us about the Scottsboro Boys and how it played a similar role in sparking a real, really sparking the movement for an anti-capitalist left in working class Alabama.
Right. No, it's a great question. And I have to give credit to Dan Carter, because Dan Carter wrote the book on the Scottsboro case, An American Tragedy. And in my reading as a graduate student trying to figure out what to do, reading that book, which does deal with the Communist Party as well, also inspired me. And he became a colleague of mine at Emory University. So Scottsboro is interesting because what I do in the book is I look at it from the vantage point of Alabama organizers. We think of Scottsboro strictly as an international cause célèbre, but basically the story is these 9 young men, they didn't all know each other either, were, a lot of them were from Tennessee, riding the rails, trying to look for jobs. And like everyone in those days, just jumping in a boxcar was a way to get around. So they happened to be there. They end up getting in a fight with some white dudes, and then the cops stop in Paint Rock, Alabama, and they stop the train. When they hear about the complaint about the fight, they start arresting people, and they discover 2 white women who are also riding rails, have no relationship to these men at all. And again, this is a very important lesson in terms of the kind of racial and sexual and gender politics that we dealt with then, and we still do it today. In order for these young women to try to get out of being arrested for solicitation, for whatever it is, just being women alone means that you're subject to police power. They said, well, these guys raped us, these 9 young, boys, some were boys, youngest was 13, and some were like young teenagers, older teenagers. So of course this never happened. One of the victims, I say victims, but one of the people who was accused of Ruby Bates actually recanted testimony. Now, why did this happen? And this is where the Communist Party comes in. Cases like these were a dime a dozen, where some black man or black men are being accused of a crime. If they're not lynched, the criminal justice system picks them up and they will be either legally lynched in the sense that they might get the death penalty or go to jail forever. This happens all the time. The Communist Party actually had something that a lot of progressive organizations didn't have, a newspaper, the Southern Worker. They had editors. They had organizers. They'd been fighting on behalf of Black rights. In Alabama, they were involved in a Black girl who was raped by a white man, trying to get justice for her. There were all these other cases. In fact, there's a whole bunch of cases in Alabama in 1930 involving a guy named Tom Robertson who was lynched because he had if I remember correctly, had a fight over a car battery or some kind of battery. And the lynchings in Alabama and throughout the South led to a conference that the Communist Party held in Tennessee, in Chattanooga, I believe. And in that conference, they said, look, we need to pay attention to lynching. We need to make this one of our agenda items. That's the context in which the Scottsboro defendants are arrested and they become a case. So the party then jumped on it. The NAACP sent their attorneys, but they're not that interested. The party sent an attorney to defend these people. But what they did was they developed a strategy, which they'd already developed before through the International Labor Defense, and that is a strategy of putting injustice before the court of popular opinion. So the idea was to tell the world the story of the Scottsboro case, to get petitions everywhere, to show photographs, to get stories in the press in every single country. And so they took a local story and made it an international one, to the point where you had demonstrations in Tokyo, free the Scottsboro boys, demonstrations in Moscow, demonstrations in Cape Town, South Africa. And that tragedy and their fight to try to free them became a mobilizing tool, or not, I shouldn't say tool because that makes it seem like it's deliberate, but it became a point of mobilization for African Americans who had no interest necessarily in the left, but saw an organization fighting on behalf of the rights of Black people within a criminal justice system that they knew was unjust in the first place. And that really changed the character of what the party was doing. And a lot of people joined because of that. It's a very similar story. It's like, with Emmett Till. The murder of Emmett Till did more to convince a lot of Black people to join the civil rights movement, later SNCC, SCLC, than say Brown versus the Board of Education. Because Emmett Till was like, they could see themselves. Right. Just like a lot of African Americans could see themselves suddenly caught up in some kind of dragnet and being accused of something they didn't do. And it was a tragedy in terms of how many people end up staying in jail longer than they needed to, which is one day more. But the fact is that for the Communist Party and for the left generally, for the CP left, the Scottsboro case became that sort of rallying cry to build a movement that was not just about class struggle in the formal sense, but about racial justice.
Right, and that my understanding of the way that you presented is that and cases like that really did a lot to convince working class Black folks in Alabama that like the left is kind of where I'm gonna get help to make my life better. And that's, if you could talk a little bit about kind of the makeup of the party, because I think that's one of the most interesting things about the Alabama Communist Party is that, when you think of communists in the 20th century in America, you might imagine kind of somebody like me, like a yuppie, like, some white college educated yuppie. But that was not at all the party in Alabama. So what was up with that?
Right. No, it's a very, very good point. This was a working class, mostly Black organization. And by working class, and let's just focus on sort of the two regions. One is the kind of Birmingham, Bessemer region, and then the rural areas of Montgomery. But Birmingham, Bessemer, you're talking about steel workers, iron ore workers, miners. Hold on one second. Can you close the door, please? I can't hear. Sorry about that. Problem with pandemics, you have to do the things from home.
No worries at all.
Okay, so imagine working class. Many of the folks, not all, but couldn't read or write or had maybe second or third grade education. They were members of gospel quartets. Many were devout Christians. The Bible became a very important source for them in terms of kind of justifying the work that they're doing, explaining. There was also, so you have this Black working class kind of base. And in fact, at one point, the Communist Party's membership was larger than NAACP in Birmingham, much larger. And so it was, I wouldn't call it a mass organization, but it did have significant numbers. So there's that. But then also you have white working class men and women as well as a couple of outliers. I mean, there was a woman named Jane Speed who came from money. And her mother also came. They were very wealthy. The family happened to be in Vienna, I think, under fascism, and saw a lot. I mean, and then end up coming back to Alabama and then joining the Communist Party. And so she opened up a bookstore in Birmingham, a left-wing bookstore in Birmingham, Alabama, in like 1939. I mean, who does that, right?
Right.
And so it's an interesting group. And because it was predominantly Black with white members, there was a way in which African Americans were pushed into leadership positions within the party. So imagine what it meant to be in a space where Black working class men and women, often with very little formal education, could actually critique a white comrade who you typically can't even be in the same classroom with because of segregation, critique them and say, you know what, your positions are wrong and this is what we need to do. I mean, it was the kind of thing where the social relationships were just unheard of at the time. And it angered a lot of the white working class men and women, but they stuck with it. Many of them did. And learn and develop social relationships that I would argue were stronger and more genuine than even some of the left formations in places like Chicago, in LA, and New York, and Philadelphia. You know?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and you touched a little bit on the religiosity of these communities. You know, there are so many kind of narratives that your book really attacks kind of head on, and another one of them is that communism is anti-Christian and anti-religion, and certainly there are flavors of it that are. And Marx was not a theist, right. And he did not believe that people should be, but basically everybody in the party in Alabama was. What was that kind of interplay there between you said that they would use churches for party meetings.
Right, exactly. Party meetings and union meetings, some churches, because of course there were churches in the payroll of the Tennessee Coal and Iron Company, some ministers who got money basically to be union busters, which goes to show there's a long history of Black elite complicity in undermining working class movements. But for the most part, the gospel quartets for some Black male members, like I think it was Henry O. Mayfield and Hosea Hudson, that was a circuit of singers that was a recruiting tool for the Communist Party. No one ever think that, right?
Wow. I've always wanted to be in a gospel quartet, so maybe this is the way in.
I know it shocked me, but I spent a lot of time with Hosea Hudson telling me these stories. But also, the Bible became very important because, it was a genuine use of the Bible and understanding of it, what we would think of today as liberation theology, but they weren't thinking in those terms, because the Bible was the text that people knew. And, and it was so much in their biblical interpretation that justified the work they were doing about the least of these, and what does it mean to be impoverished, and it's a sin to have money and just basically hold on to it. So this is the kind of stuff that drew people to the party without it necessarily becoming a trick. They weren't trying to convince people. But the other part of this story too is that among the white, I wouldn't say elite, but the more educated members of the party were committed, especially during the Popular Front, many were Jewish. And many were, in fact, dealing with a Jewish community that, in some cases, was split, very anti-communist on the one hand, but also very sympathetic, depending, because Alabama has a long history of a Jewish community there. And so that was also an issue or a factor in terms of who became the central figures, people like Joseph Gelders, for example, and his daughter Marge Gelders were among those. And so, this is not to say that there wasn't an interest in kind of Marxism or an interest in understanding the rest of the world beyond a kind of biblical framework. In fact, there was political education that took place. I
remember one of the things that you said in the book was that when I think it was Hosea Hudson was sent to New York for that political education for those classes by the party, that he came back and something like he had never felt more kind of dignified, more like a man, and that's really amazing, and that's awesome.
Yeah, well, what's great, I mean, he went to New York, but he also went to the Soviet Union.
Right.
Which is the other thing. So he went, Henry O. Mayfield went, and they studied at a school, basically the Lenin School. Then there was also another school called the University of Toilers of the East, Kuba. So imagine, just think about what it means to grow up in Georgia or Alabama, or to be like Al Murphy, for example, is another one, who they know the South, they know churches, they know unions. They have spent some time in grade school, usually a segregated schoolhouse where they would only be in school for maybe a few months out of the year because they'd be kids of sharecroppers. And then suddenly, free passage to the USSR to go to Moscow. Right. And you've never been outside. I mean, some of those cats never been outside the state of Alabama. So that was something that was extraordinary. And what's interesting is that some of them went there without basic literacy skills. So it wasn't like they were studying, Lenin and Marxist selected works. They were just learning to read and write, and in circles with people from all over the globe, from different levels of political education. And they did come back really emboldened in terms of their ability to organize, in terms of knowledge of the world. And then also the other source of education was the fact that there's a press. So the Southern Worker was published. Sharecroppers and workers would write letters to the Southern Worker, which would be published. They read the Daily Worker. They read the Labor Defender, which was the International Labor Defense Journal. They read the Negro Worker, which was an international publication that circulated among some of the Alabama comrades that told stories about struggles in South Africa and Kenya, in Australia, places like that. I mean, it was an amazing thing. And so what I do talk about in the book is that a lot of the women, young girls in particular, were the ones who usually had more formal education, and they tend to be literate, in part because the avenues of, say, working in a steel mill wasn't open to them. So for girls, Black girls growing up in Alabama, they call it the farmer's daughter effect. You had to get as much education as possible to be a teacher or a social worker. So they would be reading out loud to whole groups of working people under a shady tree or in a park, just reading from pages of the Southern Worker. And that's how people who couldn't read got the information. So imagine what it meant. It meant that, and this is one of my favorite stories, that when Ernst Thälmann, who was a German communist, was thrown in prison under Hitler, and this is before the real takeoff of the Third Reich, there was a whole campaign to free him. So you have these African Americans never left Alabama, young people putting out posters and leaflets throughout Tallapoosa County saying, free Ernst Thälmann. And the owners of the plantation like, who is this? What are you doing? And so when they say that there was a conspiracy and there were Reds, I mean, it's kind of true.
Yeah.
They just happen to be Black.
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, whenever during the civil rights movement, one of the things that you'll see from some of the white reactionaries is like race mixing is communism, and it's like, well, I mean, there's
some truth to that.
I mean, you're not completely wrong.
Hey, Jacob.
Yes.
We got a couple of questions coming in.
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions. I've seen the YouTube chat, and I'm working on incorporating them in as I've got those in my head, David. I appreciate it. But yeah, you said that there's a lot of this international cooperation in the party on the part of these folks who. A phrase that I use is "I ain't never been nowhere." I'm just some guy who grew up in rural Alabama, ain't never been nowhere, and these folks they ain't never been nowhere, and now they're going internationally and learning all of these things. And there's a lot they're talking about freeing German communists from Nazi oppression kind of stuff. But there's also a lot of really interesting autonomy that the Alabama Communist Party had that I'd like for you to talk about some, because there were a lot of international drama. It's more important than that, but there was a lot of international conflicts within the international communist movement that the Alabama communists were like, whatever, we'll take the party line, but it doesn't really matter to us. They were really kind of singularly focused on, not singularly, but they were really focused on, how do I make my life better?
Right. That is absolutely true, because you cannot peg the different machinations of the Communist International to what was happening on the ground. So to just give you three quick examples, one, the Communist Party's position in 1928 was that Black people in the Black Belt counties of the South have a right to self-determination, a right to succeed from the Union if they choose to and have their own nation. Well, it was an empowering idea, but it wasn't like folks who were trying to figure out how to not be evicted from their house, or who needed coal because they had burned all the firewood they had just to keep warm. They weren't thinking about that. They were thinking about what to do next. And so they developed all these strategies that were so local, like using penny postcards to send to social workers to say, if you take the workers' flour and stuff, we're after you. We're going to expose you. In fact, we know that you're sleeping with the principal of the school, and we're going to expose that information. That's the strategy. Strategies also involve things like being really underground, using jumper cables to get people's lights back on without being detected. But in terms of the international,
that was really cool.
But there was one change. Well, another change I should mention is that when we had the Nazi-Soviet pact, and the Communist Party went from being like strongly, anti-fascist to then focusing on supporting the Soviets' agreement with the Nazis in 1939, which was a bad decision, but was meant to be a kind of stopgap measure to try to keep the Germans from invading Russia. Whatever the case may be in terms of how one reads it, the fact of the matter is that it didn't matter to people on the ground. That wasn't their fight. But the one place where it did matter internationally was in 1935, when the Communist International decided they're going to, open up the Popular Front idea so that they could build alliances with liberals. And this is where in Alabama, it was a little bit different in that the party leadership did try hard to do just that, to build alliances with white liberals in the South, often at the expense of the working class struggles, not so much the expense of the Union, because they were kind of going underground, participating in the Union, but really at the expense of the unemployed, expense of all those kind of grassroots struggles. And the idea was, if we can just get a broader base, then we'll be stronger. But the problem is that in a place like Alabama, like Georgia, like Louisiana, Mississippi, to be a liberal in the South, to be a white liberal was to be less radical than some of the white working class comrades. Liberals were devoted to Jim Crow, were committed to the status quo. Liberals were like Hugo Black, who was a Supreme Court justice, but also started out in the Klan. That's what liberals look like. So what they end up doing is cutting some of their ties and undermining the sort of working class foundation that they had in trying to chase down liberals that they could never win. And instead, what they did get were really amazing radical intellectuals like Joseph Gelders, like people. I could say this now, like Rosa Parks, who wasn't a member of the party, but she was very close to those folks. Sally Davis, who's the mother of Angela Davis. There's a lot of interesting people who are close to the party, if not members.
Right. That's and so there was a lot of focus on kind of what can make my life better, what's happening on the ground, and how can we use the party to make our lives better. And so what were and one of those ways that they saw was the labor movement. And I think this will be a good way to bring us into what's happening today. But what were the Alabama Communist Party's connections to the labor movement, and how did they use the labor movement for kind of for their own ends, and how did they work with the labor movement? What was the intersection there of the labor movement and the party in Alabama?
Right. Well, to answer the question, how did they use the movement for their own ends? Their ends were simple: to build a strong labor movement.
Right.
And so that's really, that's just something, a point of clarity for your listeners, because
I appreciate that. That was not good wording on my part.
But it's exactly. I'm glad you said it that way, because actually that is how we think often of it. And I think it's important to frame it that way, because it is true that what they wanted to do is build a strong labor movement, because their argument was, we need a strong labor movement because that's how you build a strong working class movement. And so the party, so you got to think of it as sort of three different phases. The first is before the CIO, where the party was the main force in town. In 1934, Alabama experienced a massive strike wave. Textile workers, steel workers, miners, and the Communist Party was behind not so much the textile workers, but the other strikes. They really were building a movement, and they had these alternative unions, maritime workers in Mobile, and so they were building a union movement. And then with the New Deal, and with the second New Deal, the opportunity for industrial organizing, this is first New Deal is like the National Industrial Recovery Act, but then with the Wagner Act, there was like a catalyst for really building industrial unions, and that's where the CIO comes into play. And so here, the role of the party was not so much to be open, because this so coincides with the Popular Front, but to go as individual activists, as individual organizers into the unions. And they were the best organizers. Ebb Cox and Henry O. Mayfield and Hosea Hudson. Asbury Howard, who wasn't a communist but very close to the party, was the leader of the International Union of Mine Mills Smelter Workers, along with Van Jones and a bunch of other folks who were like either in or close to the party. And so they built the CIO, but more importantly, and this is very, very important, they pushed for an agenda in which unions were also fighting in communities for voting rights. So the Right to Vote Club was a union, had a union connection. Communists were organizing Right to Vote clubs and were pushing CIO members, Black members in cultural politics to have that right preserved. And all the sort of third period you get is, because the book technically is about the Depression, but it has a long chapter that goes into the 40s and 50s and into the present. And in that chapter, I talk about the left-led unions and how the Cold War and red baiting and anti-communism really were intended as a weapon to undermine, in particular, the International Union of Mine, Mill, and Smelter Workers, which is strong in Bessemer. And in that union, its leader, Asbury Howard, was really a kind of civil rights, union, working class, brilliant organizer who then was attacked on all sides through the anti-communist work. In 1949, the CIO, which by that time was really run by anti-communists, forced all the left unions to either sign a loyalty oath and do all kinds of things or be expelled. And Mine Mill was expelled in 1949.
Right. Yeah. You said that, these organizers were really good and the unions were really effective. What were some of the things that they actually won for their members?
And the best examples tend to be the rural areas, but just in terms of the urban and, the most important thing that they were able to do, the Steelworkers Organizing Committee, SWOC, and through Mine Mill and United Mine Workers, those three big unions, party organizers, party members were the ones that were able to recruit and win over workers. And that's how the unions were able to survive. And they built the CIO in many ways. But they also fought company unions. And this is something we don't always talk about. I mean, we'll get to this with respect to the Amazon workers, but one of the ways that, just your viewers may or may not know this history, but in those days, because of a strong National Labor Relations Board, and because of the Wagner Act, which made all this possible, the NLRB was actually friendly to unions, which is not that's not been the case for a while, but actually supported the idea of unions. And so when Tennessee Coal and Iron Company, for example, would fire 160 workers for going on strike, the NLRB would say, go back to Tennessee Coal and Iron and said, you can't do that. That's illegal. You've got to reinstate them. So one of the things that happens in Alabama, throughout the South, and throughout the country, is that in order to continue union breaking and to get around the new labor law, you create a company union. The company unions are not new, but these company unions are specific to this moment. So
Uber's trying to make some right now.
Yes, they are. And that's one of the questions about what's going to happen to Amazon. But to give you one precise example, the Brotherhood of Captive Miners was a union. It was a company union that was created in response to Mine Mill. And what those communist organizers were able to do was succeed in both forcing union recognition and recruiting members from the Brotherhood of Captive Miners into Mine Mill.
Right.
So they were really good organizers in that respect. They would, and to be an organizer in a union often doesn't mean doing anything necessarily heroic, but really being able to mobilize people and get them to stick with it and to win those elections. And that's what they were able to do, get them to win those elections by basically letting people know through education work what the union is there for.
Right.
All right, next up, as we are taking a look at some of the best of from the Valley Labor Report, let's take another look at, a look at another segment from a couple of years ago, back when we were in the Athens studio, where we take a look at some then recent research on the effect of Act 10 on Wisconsin public school teachers.
There was a story that I saw this week, a working paper that came out that I thought was really interesting. And what it was that, Scott Walker was the governor of Wisconsin for quite a while, and he earned a reputation as one of the most anti-union, anti-worker politicians in the country. I mean, he led a full frontal assault on working people in Wisconsin. And following that, a gender pay gap has arisen where none existed before between teachers, a recent study has found. The researchers that did this study controlled for non-gender related factors like education, experience, performance reviews, etc., and they found that the gap could not be attributed to any of these other factors. After they controlled for these other factors, the pay gap between men and women is now approximately 11%, where it was 0 before among teachers. That is astounding. That is really astounding. And so let's back up just a second and kind of set the stage for how that happened. So when I say that Walker led an assault on workers, what do I mean? He did lots of things, but specifically Act 10 is what the researchers attribute this new gender pay gap to. And what Act 10 is a law that was passed in Wisconsin in 2010 that, one, virtually eliminated collective bargaining rights for public sector employees. They could no longer bargain over hours or anything over base pay. It ended tenure and seniority-based raises, and it mandated recertification annually. That means every year there's a union election for public sector employees.
Wow.
That's
unheard of.
That is not normal. Every year you've got to vote to recertify the union. And that makes unions there perpetually vulnerable to union busting campaigns. It never ends. And so before Act 10, union contracts covered all teachers. They covered men and women and everybody, with the same experience and education and everything. Obviously, they got the same pay and benefits. They were on a schedule. Now, teachers are responsible for negotiating their own wages individually. And because of this, a pay gap has arisen. And again, I just want to stress that the pay gap the researchers controlled for all the other relevant factors, education, experience, performance reviews, all of these things, they were controlled for. The only thing that can explain this pay gap was the gender and the reluctance of women to ask for a raise.
Yeah.
And this was an interesting tidbit, though. There was still no pay gap where there were female supervisors. I thought that was interesting.
That is interesting. That's strange that they would have included that in their data, but that's extremely interesting.
I thought that was interesting. I'm not exactly sure what it tells us, but I thought it was interesting to mention. But even though there's been a pay gap, maybe the thing that you're thinking is men are making more than they did before Act 10. You would be wrong. Even the men who are now making 11% more than their exactly the same female colleagues, they have lower salaries than they did before Act 10 passed. In fact, Act 10 purported to usher in a new era of educational excellence and teacher performance.
Yeah. Ain't that the ploy that it's always under?
Yeah. That's and so what actually happened? We can evaluate this now. We can evaluate what it did. It's 10 years after its passage. So what happened? 5 years after its passage, median pay was down by nearly $11,000 annually. $11,000. That is insane, especially knowing the fact that teachers are already underpaid. Teacher turnover rates are nearly double what they were before. The percentage of teachers with less than 5 years experience has increased by nearly 25% in Wisconsin. And so obviously, student educational achievement has decreased.
Yeah.
It has done the opposite of everything that it purported to set out to do.
It would be real interesting to know if they done data on those border counties. As far as on the border of Michigan and other states, to see if the amount of teacher turnover is at, because hey, if I'm within 30 minutes of being able to drive across the state lines and go to work at another school with good collective bargaining, I guarantee you their turnover rate is way higher than that.
They I don't know about specific border counties in Wisconsin, but they did mention the fact that Minnesota has not seen any of these drastic. I mean, these are drastic changes, right? We're talking about in 10 years, teacher turnover rates doubling, the percentage of teachers with less than 5 years experience increasing by a quarter. These are huge. Their pay being down by $11,000. $11,000? That's like...
Yeah, that's insane.
That is... I mean...
Already underpaid. Already way
Seriously.
underpaid.
You're talking about a teacher pay. You're talking about cutting 25 or 20% of their salary, almost certainly. That's... Or maybe a little bit less than that. But it's like, that is a big chunk taken out of your paycheck every year. And it would be one thing if all this happened and teachers just had a horrible job, but the students were better educated. But they're not. They're not. Student educational achievement has decreased.
Yeah, well, of course, you got younger teachers coming in. Inexperienced teachers. And nothing against the younger teachers. They've got to cut their teeth as well. But at the same time, you need the tenured teachers in there to show them the ropes, to teach them how to teach.
Right. And so what we have learned, if you're like honest, right? If you're honest and you're just objectively looking at the facts and you're using logic, okay? That we like to, Ben Shapiro likes to talk about facts and logic, and facts don't care about your feelings, okay? What we have learned from Act 10 is that, funny enough, reducing pay and benefits and control over the job debilitates worker morale, lowers performance, and hurts the consumers and the community.
Yeah.
Which, like anybody with half a brain could tell you that. And anybody who has been in the workforce, I have said this, I don't even know how many times. Anybody who's been in the workforce knows that management and supervisors get things wrong all the time.
Constant.
And unions allow innovation. They allow workers a place to speak their mind and have control over their workplace and do their job better, especially in these service-oriented fields like healthcare and education. It's not like these people are just, hammering on something, right? These are care-oriented professions that we're talking about right now. And so they want to do, like teachers, nurses, doctors, they want to do their jobs better. And when they have unions, when they have protections in their workplace, they have more freedom to do their job better. They have more control over their workplace. And taking that away obviously hurts them, but it hurts everybody else too.
Yeah. It really speaks to solidarity and collective bargaining and being able to, a rising tide raises all boats. It really speaks to the fact that when you break that down and start requiring people to negotiate independently for their salary, it's cutthroat.
Yeah.
So-and-so is doing this, I should be making more, so-and-so is doing this. It's constant,
Absolutely. It's totally constant. And it's really astounding, like the way that, and you mentioned that a rising tide lifts all boats. That is supposed to be the logic of trickle down and tax cuts. And we've seen it over and over and over and over. We've seen it in Kansas. We've seen it in Wisconsin. We've seen it in America. It does not work. Unions work. Unions are the rising tide that does lift all boats, and the same people that are going to try to sell you on this BS trickle-down capitalist corporate economics are going to be the ones that tell you that unions actually hurt workers. Unions hurt their community, and it's a bunch of nonsense. Like, you can't fall for it.
Yeah. You left me speechless. I'm speechless. Yeah. We've only got a few more seconds, but yeah, it's a good point. And I mean, I grew up watching Scott Walker. I remember Scott Walker, and I remember all those teachers going into the Wisconsin state capitol and demanding respect. And hopefully we'll get back to that soon, especially in this state.
Yeah.
Especially in this state.
I hope so. Folks, this is the Valley Labor Report. We will be right back. Give us a call, 1-866-494-9866.
You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story and Jacob Morrison.
Folks, Welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. It is Saturday, October 10th, 2020. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host, David Story. We appreciate your time today.
The weather's got everybody beat down, man. The weather, I'm surprised after all that great talk the last hour.
We hadn't got any callers.
We hadn't got a caller.
Give us a call.
1-866-494-9866.
The number is 1-866-494-WVNN. We've been talking about... the guest that we had in the first part of the program was Daniel Harris. He was talking about right to work and the Democrats and the conservative agenda to destroy worker power, and that was really interesting. You can go back and watch that later on our YouTube channel at the Valley Labor Report.
You can check it out on the podcast if you're a podcast listener.
That's right. Check it out on the podcast. And after that, we've been talking about Act 10, and it's the destruction of public sector unions in Wisconsin and how that has affected teacher pay, teacher morale, and student educational achievement. And in fact, talking about the destruction of public sector unions, the total union density in Wisconsin has decreased by 31%.
Yeah, that's not surprising.
By 31% since 2010.
Did Wisconsin pick up any of that off of the West Virginia, Colorado teacher strikes or anything like that? I don't recall seeing Wisconsin doing anything.
Yeah, I don't recall anything like that.
And that kind of speaks to that Act 10 as well, because that would break down the ability to organize effectively.
Yeah. I imagine that the situation in West Virginia is similar to the situation in Wisconsin now, but it's like but it's like it was newer for Wisconsin teachers, and so maybe that's why they're
took a little while to
whereas teachers in West Virginia that's like the status quo, and so they were used to organizing under those pressures, and maybe they weren't in Wisconsin. Maybe that was it. So the reason that I did all this reading about like public sector unions and Act 10 in Wisconsin and all that is because of that study that found that there was no gender pay gap among teachers in Wisconsin prior to when you account for like other relevant factors like education and experience and all of these things and time spent in the workforce and there was no gender pay gap.
Yeah, well, Wisconsin. I mean, just the amount of money alone that was lost. I mean, you're talking about. That's an insane.
I know.
I can't imagine taking that kind of cut.
It's crazy. And now there is a nearly 11% difference between the pay that a similarly situated male teacher gets to a similarly situated female teacher, and that kind of. And both of them are worse off than they were before, and that really, in my mind, kind of underscores the fact that like women's issues are workers' issues. Minority issues are workers' issues. Like we talked to Jake Grumbach, University of Washington researcher, a couple of months ago now, I guess it was, about the effect that union membership has on racism in the workplace and the effect that it has on racial pay gaps. Yeah. And, that's why, like, unions and the labor movement are at the center of, they have to be at the center of equality in any movement for such a goal, because otherwise it's going to be ineffective.
Yeah. I mean, that's one thing that I'm so proud to be able to walk through my workplace with, I would say we probably have 15-20% female workers out there, and to know that every one of them make the exact same thing that their counterpart sitting next to them does. I mean, it's really uplifting.
Yes.
I don't know. It's the best system that could be in place right now.
And why the heck shouldn't you have a say over your workplace? I mean, that's like so, people in America are so like beat down with this capitalist ideology that you're supposed to, when you clock in.
Should be great. I mean, that's what you hear constantly in this state. Just be grateful you have a job.
Right.
Seriously?
Yeah, be grateful that you have a job and just accept the fact that when you clock in, you become a subject and not a citizen.
Not just when you clock in. This is something that we've been dealing with a lot here lately. Mm-hmm. When you're off hours, when you're not at work, the companies are still attacking you. Look at social media posts and things like that. They will discipline and terminate you for off the work social media posts. I mean, it's not, they own you.
Yeah.
As simple as that.
Yeah. And, it's real, like, when you talk about this, this freedom-loving, liberty-loving, I hate the government energy that so many people have, like, I can get on board with that, man. Like, screw the government, give me my liberty, give me my guns, like this. Folks, like, look, I'll let you in on a secret here. I'll let you in on a secret. If you go left far enough, you get your guns back, okay? You get your guns back, all right? You just got to go left far enough. You got to get past them libs, okay? Got to get past the libs, and you get your guns back. Yeah. But, I'm like all about that. But the folks that have that energy towards the government, they completely lose it when it comes to the boss. Like,
Well, not just the boss. I mean, those same people are bootlickers all the way around.
Folks, on this program, we love to lift up worker testimony. So I'm excited to show this interview to some folks who probably didn't hear it, since we've got so many new listeners from the time that this happened. This has been similarly over 2 years ago. And in this clip, we talked to a pipe fitter about, get this, making about $200,000 in 1 year with no college degree, without being a boss. Check it out.
I am here now talking to James Alexander. He is a member of the Steam Fitters and Pipe Fitters Union. He's going to be talking to us about being that's another trade union. He'll be talking to us about what it's like being a steam fitter, pipe fitter. So James, thanks for talking to me. I appreciate it, brother.
All right, man. Glad to be here today, brother. Glad to be here.
All right, so James, tell us just the top line. One of this amazed me. Tell us how much you made without a college degree in California as a pipe fitter.
Okay, so I traveled out to California to work at Chevron Refinery. They had a big modernization project going on. So I done a 12-month run out in California. I was able to make a grand total of $207,000, and that's with 6 weeks off work. So we had vacations for like Thanksgiving was a week, Christmas was a week, 4th of July was a week off, and then we had a couple of brush fires out there, so we got time off. So I'd say I had a total of about 6 weeks off, but we worked 6 10s the whole time, and I was able to amass $207,000 on the check. Now that's not including my health and welfare benefits. They pay back to my union hall, and also another $19,000 in retirement that goes right back to your retirement plan.
I mean, that's like, you are going to be hard pressed to be able to make that kind of money without a college degree. Even with a college degree, I've got a degree in math, and even where I'm at in a union, working for the federal government, there's no pathway for me to be making $200,000 even with a math degree. So that's the kind of, and no college degree. Started working out of high school with the Pipe Fitters Union, and that's the kind of stuff like that. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about, and you can make that and not. You're not killing yourself. You're getting 6 weeks off. 6 weeks off is a lot off for most people. And talk to me about the safety aspects. Like we've talked on this show multiple times about how study after study comes out showing that union work sites have like considerably lower fatality rates and injury rates, and that's because of the union. That's because the workers are there protecting each other. So talk to us about kind of the safety aspect of being a union pipe fitter.
Yes, sir. So they harp on safety on all job sites or whatever. As you go out, you'll always see they have things in place for you to stop the job. If you see anything doesn't look right, if you got any questions, there's never a situation where you can get fired or get retaliated against because you stopped the job for a safety aspect. You've got your general foreman, you got your foreman, you got safety professionals on the job, and it's always the biggest part of the job. Whatever they say, there's no job that's worth anyone getting injured or no time frame set up to try to beat a deadline to get someone injured. So as you go through the union side of it, you always see safety at the forefront of the job site. I mean, a lot of guys you'll see this in safety. They've got over 20 years of time with the trade. As they get into their older years, they can't climb the scaffold like they used to. They go into safety professionals or whatever, and so you see them knowing your pain as you go through about trying to work with a guard or taking a guard off. They've got things in place for you to stop, acknowledge what the issue is, and try to do it safely. So, I mean, it makes you feel good about wanting everybody to go home every day just like they did when they came to work. So it's a big part of our job, to work safe.
Yeah, I would say so. And, a lot of people in the trades, they don't have that. If they're not in a union, but they're in the trades, you talked about, some folks kind of have just get it done, that kind of just get it done attitude that you've seen in some non-union contractors and some supervisors and management and bosses just telling people to kind of forego some safety aspect to just get the job done.
Yes,
and they can't make you do that if you're in a union.
That's correct or whatever. There's no repercussions for you being able to call a timeout just to have another set of eyes to come in and look at something. A lot of, older people or young people don't understand where we are as union members, but what they fail to realize is that somewhere along the lines, there was some blood spilled or blood shed for the union to be able to come in and set up the things that we have, such as the great pay, the great benefits, the great retirement, the safetyness of the job. All that right there plays a part in it. Somewhere along the line, someone shed some blood to be able to make it so now we can go to work and our families can know we're coming home to them. We're coming home with a good paycheck, excellent benefits for your wife and your family. Mm-hmm. So it's a win-win situation for those who are interested in it.
And that's so important, being able to rely on, like, I'm going to come home at the end of the day, and I don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. And I don't have to worry about a boss trying to make me forego something that I know is dangerous, that I know could get me killed. I feel confident in the fact that I can make sure I have a safe work site, and that's something that you just really can't place a price tag on that. But what about the retirement aspect?
All right, and a lot of things what people don't understand. So on a conventional job, you got a lot of jobs now that they've went away from the company retirement. They have your 401k plans, and they'll contribute a little bit. You contribute a little bit, so that's money out of your bring home salary. Well, a lot of times in the trade, we have a dollar value that's already written into our contract. So in essence, really all you do is go to work and your benefits are paid. You got union halls like Philadelphia Local 420. They have an annuity. So you go to work out of one of those halls and you get like $13 to $14 for every hour you work. And they call it pyramid. And so when you work a time and a half hour, you get time and a half money. So let's just say you work somewhere like 420 in Philadelphia. You can work 6 months, 6 days a week, and leave with something like $16,000 in an annuity account. You can roll it back home to your local pension, or you can leave it in Philadelphia, and that's another $16,000 that's growing, that's in an account for you. That's like Minnesota, Philadelphia, New Jersey, New York. It's phenomenal the way they do their benefits package. And like I said, you had an option to leave the money there or roll it back home to your local pension if you want to keep it all under the same umbrella. But that's not out of your hourly check. That's in addition to what you're getting paid. And they have scales like $57 an hour for a pipe fitter, $53 an hour for a pipe fitter. Somewhere like California, $74 an hour for a pipe fitter.
Wow.
Indiana is like $43 an hour for a pipe fitter. So, it's just a wide open area out there. If you want to travel, go see the country. It's like a paid vacation.
Yeah, well, that's another thing that that's really cool to me that I've noticed talking to folks in the trade unions is that if you work for a non-union contractor, your job is kind of dependent on the local construction industry. If construction slows down in Huntsville and you're working for a non-union contractor and they lay you off, it's like, well, that's that. If construction slows down in Huntsville and you work and you're in a union, you're in a trade union,
you can just go work somewhere else, because there's always somewhere in the country that's building something. And so if work slows down, you'll have a job somewhere else.
Yep, we're you have 50 states plus Canada. The United Association covers all 50 states and Canada. So you have the option to go and travel, see the world, as a tradesman, make a lot of money, good retirement, good benefits. Myself personally, I've worked in refineries, I've worked in auto plants, I've worked in computer chip plants, pretty much natural gas plants. So I've pretty much seen everything. I mean, a lot of the work is similar, a lot of it is a little bit different, but it's all union supported, safety, and good money.
Yeah, and that's, again, like, you don't have, this isn't something that you've got to go to college for. Like, you can start their apprenticeship program right after you get out of high school and be on track to make good money, have a secure future, be able to work anywhere in the United States or Canada, know that you're going to have safety on your job, have a good retirement plan. I mean, this is just, it's not stuff that you can find in the non-union world.
Yes, sir. It's like, I'll put numbers to the paper. Say a guy's 18 years old and graduate high school, not sure what he want to do. If he's willing to start an apprenticeship program in 5 years, so that means he's 23 years old. Now, he can work in Alabama if he wants to, but at the age of 23 or 24, as a journeyman craftsman, pipe fitter, electrician, millwright, whatever, as a 23-year-old young man, he could actually, with a gas card, hotel room, he could go across the country and at the age of 24 years old be earning as much as $75 an hour without owing any college money or owing the federal government for student loan. He'd be free. The union hall has gave him all the tools and the knowledge he need, and he's already earning money as an apprentice. But as a journeyman, a 24-year-old man can be earning in excess of $150,000, $170,000 easy.
Yeah, I mean that's really amazing. And like when we talk about the labor movement, when we talk about how unions are good for working people, they're good for their community, like, we're not just blowing smoke up your bum. Like, we know what we're talking about, and this is an example of what we're talking about. James, thank you so much for talking to us.
All right, thank you so much, bro. Thank you for having me.
Sadly, since we moved to the Spice Radio studio and we created our own phone number instead of using the WVNN one, which is the name of the station that we started on, we don't get as many angry callers as we did when we used the station's number. I figure that, it's just a lot easier for angry callers to call a number that they know. This is the number that we used before was the station's phone number, and so that's the same number that they heard, 24/7 basically. They wanted to call a show on that station. That's the number that they called. And so since getting and I think that's the issue. That's one of the reasons that we don't get as many angry callers, is because now we've got our own phone number, and it's not as familiar to some of the folks in the conservative radio audience. I'm not sure what to do about that. Maybe I should just say the number more often, but here's a call from when we did get some more angry callers than we do now, where he tells me that unions are unnecessary. That goes about as well as you would think it is, as you would think it did. Here it is.
We got a caller on the line.
We got Steve on the line. Welcome in, Steve. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing fine. You guys need to learn about an adage called beating a dead horse, okay? Do you understand that union membership has been on the decline in the southeast United States for years? Years. If you look around in Mississippi, Tennessee, Alabama, that all the car manufacturers have voted down unions. And you're beating the dead horse. This whole idea about organized labor and unions and all that crap is dead. It's going down.
I don't disagree with you. It has been on a decline. It's been on a decline because people, because our own working folks. have voted
because it's
consistently.
unnecessary.
It's unnecessary.
It's unnecessary.
It's unnecessary.
It's unnecessary. Well, I'll tell you what. You enjoy your weekend that was won by people fighting and dying in the streets.
Okay, panty waist. Okay, panty waist. Enough. That happened 50 years ago.
50 years is not that long. 50 years is not that long. 50 years is not that long, and it won't take 50 years to lose it. I promise you. You get rid of unions? Yeah, exactly. I mean, they've already put in regulations to cut overtime for workers.
We've been talking about Act 10 the second half of the program. We've been talking about Act 10 in Wisconsin and how only 10 years after its passage, median pay for teachers in Wisconsin is down $11,000. You don't think that the same thing, you don't think that those politicians, those bosses, those corporate oligarchs are after your pay?
Public sector unions.
What? We'll bring you in on the other side of the break. Stay tuned. This is the Valley Labor Report.
You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story and Jacob Morrison.
Folks, good morning and welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host David Story. On the line, I believe we still have Steve. Steve was telling us that unions are unnecessary because now he has the weekend and he doesn't feel like he deserves any more. And I just got through telling him how we were talking about Act 10 and how only 10 years after its passage, median pay was down by more than $11,000 for teachers. And then he mentioned something about the private sector. And here's what I will say about the private sector. Since union membership started declining in the 60s, median pay for workers has stagnated while productivity has skyrocketed. CEO to worker ratio pay has increased from 25 to 1 to 320 to 1. Who is doing the producing? Who is making that productivity rise? It's the workers. And the CEOs are now making more than 300 times what their workers are making on average, and it just so happens to coincide with the decimation of union membership and the labor movement in America, in concert with the agenda by corporate oligarchs and politicians in the Democratic and the Republican party's assault on labor. And so now, Steve, after that, I'll let you tell me why unions are unnecessary.
I guess Steve didn't want to hang out during the break.
Oh, did he not?
Looks that way.
That's unfortunate.
It is unfortunate. It's unfortunate that people can't come on here.
Yeah,
here's the thing. What you get away with on every other station, you can come on, you can make some asinine statement, and then walk away from it because facts don't matter.
Yeah,
facts don't matter.
And you talk about private sector union membership. My good brother Jeb Miles with the iron workers, he said right now in North Alabama, union iron workers make a package of over $44 an hour. Non-union iron workers make $20 an hour or less.
Yeah,
that's in the private sector.
The fact is, we are making. I'm making about the when you take inflation into the aspect, I'm making about the same thing my father made 30 years ago. We are not, and there's a reason why everyone's in debt up to their eyeballs. Nobody's got a $500 in their savings account. They're barely scraping by. Social Security is constantly under attack. Pensions have been under attack. They are doing everything they can to make you subservient and work for the rest of your life. And you're going to sit here and say unions aren't necessary. I can tell you, if you walk out anywhere in public, and most people are literally weeks away from bankruptcy if they were to lose their job today. and unions aren't necessary anymore. Well, I mean, it's this bootlicking mentality.
It's crazy. It's like, and like, why do workers not deserve the fruits of their labor?
Why do workers not deserve to get a fair contract?
Why do workers not deserve to have control over their workplace? Why should workers have to check in or have to live their entire lives under the surveillance and the eye of their boss and like live at their beck and call? Like, that's absurd. It's absurd. And the only way, and like Steve mentioned this, and it's true, unions have been on the decline since the 60s, since the 70s, since there's been a concerted assault on organized labor, since there's been a concerted assault on working people by corporate oligarchs and politicians in both parties. And but so that is true. But that's why we're on the radio right now.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing.
Because we want to change that, because the only way to make our lives better, the only way to reverse the trend of CEOs stealing our labor from us, the only way to take back our time, the only way to get a fair cut of the things that we're producing is to organize.
Yeah. Here's the thing. Answer me honestly. If you're out there driving in your car right now, the car that you signed a contract for, the car that you're making payments on, or if you're sitting in your house today, the house that you signed a contract for, the house that you're making payments on, who in their right mind would go to a bank and say, we don't need a contract. I'll let you change the interest rate anytime you want. I'll let you raise the payments anytime. There's really no reason, because, hey, I can come back in and renegotiate as often as I want, right? Who do you think's going to renegotiate? You know, this idea that you can just go into your boss independently and get you a raise every year is insanity. Get a contract. Who the most important thing you're going to ever do in your life is work. And you should have a contract stating what those working conditions are. You sign a contract for your car, and it holds both parties accountable. You sign a contract for your house, but yet you don't think you need a contract for work to hold both parties accountable?
Yeah, I know.
It's insane.
It's insane.
Alrighty, folks, we are going to round out our overtime segment today with Adam's thoughts about Alabama's Troublemaker School this year.
I did want to take a couple of minutes to reflect on last weekend's successful Alabama Troublemaker School conducted by Labor Notes at the University of Montevallo. Over 120 Southern working class activists gathered on Saturday, October 15th, to sharpen their skills and build their solidarity. The crowd was very diverse in terms of race, gender, age, industry, occupation, affiliation, and background. There were seasoned union stewards with decades of experience, new organizers just starting the fight to build a union, and community activists seeking to strengthen their coalition with labor. There were folks from across the state and from North Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia in attendance. Numerous unions and organizations were represented, with CWA and Raise Up the South in particular showing up in a big way. And there were some familiar faces there from IFPTE, Hometown Action, UMWA, RWDSU, Birmingham DSA, Starbucks Workers United, United Campus Workers, and more. And how many other spaces will you find worker-led discussion and workshops with participants ranging from line cooks to rocket scientists in the same room? Right? I just don't know of many events that are like that.
Yeah, it was amazing. You know, I wasn't able to attend, but I saw the pictures and I heard the stories that y'all have come back, and you know, just the fact that the labor movement's growing in this state, you know, says a lot about this radio. We were talking about it before the show. It says a lot about this radio show, and how y'all have kind of bridged the gaps between labor and labor-friendly organizations, and you know, organizations that kind of share our own perspective and ideologies.
Yeah, absolutely. And I give you a lot of credit for that, because, you know, you and Jacob got this thing started, and I've been fortunate enough to step in and try to help out where I could. And I'm really proud of what we've accomplished, and I'm proud to see the Troublemaker School be so successful. I think there's a lot of good things to see coming from Alabama's labor movement, and it's trending in the right direction.
Yeah, it's about time. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, back to Saturday, you had folks from call centers to coal mines learning from each other and swapping stories. And I think there's something very powerful about that, something pretty damn cool about that, really. And I want to thank Labor Notes for being willing to invest in the working people of Alabama and the South so that we can put the movement back into the Southern labor movement. And shout out to all the folks who served on the planning committee, the speakers and trainers, and everyone else who volunteered in any capacity to make this event a success. It was an honor for me to conduct a couple stewards workshops alongside a great brother from the CWA, Matt Flown. And I know when we were in Chicago for the big Labor Notes conference in June, those of us from Alabama were already scheming on how to bring Labor Notes back home. By July, Louise Leon and Courtney Smith from Labor Notes already pulled several of us together to form an organizing committee and begin the planning of this event. We all worked together to plan the content and organize the logistics. It was a collective effort and a collective success. And David, you and I were talking before the show. It was, 3 or 4 years ago when Labor Notes last held an event in Alabama. I happened to meet up with you and Jacob down there at the Adelante Worker Center, and there was maybe a dozen people there, 12, 15.
I'd bet.
And so to have roughly 10 times that number of attendees at this year's Troublemaker School, I think really demonstrates the energy of the resurgent labor movement here in Alabama and across the South.
Yep.
And
there, there's I love Labor Notes. I've always been a big fan of Labor Notes, been a subscriber for years and know most of the staff there personally. But we don't have to have Labor Notes come down. We could do this every year, and that's what, and I think that's kind of the point of what Labor Notes wants to build is something that's organic in your own community.
And sustainable.
Yep.
And I 100% agree with you. And I think there were a lot of conversations last weekend about, hey, let's not let this be the last one. Let's keep it going. And you're right. Labor Notes helped us kick it off, but we've got the people right here. We've got the expertise. And so I hope everyone who attended learned something useful and formed some new connections to grow their allies. I can't wait to see the lasting impact that comes out of it because I know it certainly made a difference in some of those relationships. If not the knowledge, is going to make a lasting impact. And for those of you who couldn't attend, be sure to check out last week's episode of the Valley Labor Report where Jacob interviewed several of the workshop trainers. It's not a replacement for having been there, but it will give you an idea of what we learned and discussed on Saturday and hopefully advance your learning when it comes to the labor movement and organizing. Thanks again, Labor Notes. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to the next Troublemaker School. As David said, we can do this and we should keep doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. If nothing else, just getting those rank and file members together to talk about how to move forward in this state and progress our ideologies and our agendas and, it's important. Everybody else does it except for us. Granted, we've got AFL-CIO conventions and things like that, but there's never really a space like what Labor Notes provides. Where rank and file members talk about those issues and not people that are separated from you in leadership positions.
Right, and something you just said that resonated is that. If you think about it, the bosses and politicians are always doing these kind of events, right? They're always networking. They're always at the golf course or at the casino. Or
CPAC.
Right. They're always getting together. They're always sharpening their skills and building their solidarity amongst themselves. So I think it's imperative that we do the same.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. I really appreciate it. I hope you've enjoyed this trip down memory lane. While I was searching for clips, I actually found more than we would fit in a normal runtime. So what we're going to be doing is dropping a double overtime in a couple of days with some of these clips, some of the extra clips that we found that we wanted to share with you that we did not have room to share in the main runtime. So make sure that you're subscribed to the channel so that you see that in your feed. Until then, send us money at tvlr.fm/donate. Stay safe, and all power to the working class.